Hello everyone, and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Catherine Riverside, and I've spent 12 years protecting the wilderness of Alaska. I have a PhD in marine biology, and I know these rivers better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I've stared down 15 brown bears, pulled drowning fishermen from ice-cold rapids, and tracked salmon migrations through some of the most dangerous waters in North America. But I never believed in the old stories. The Kushtaka, that's what the native elders called them, shape-shifting otter spirits that could steal your soul right through the water. I thought they were just tales to keep kids from swimming in dangerous currents. I was wrong about a lot of things. It was August 1979, and I was stationed at the remote section of the Naknek River system during peak salmon run. This is bear country. Grizzlies come down to the water to feast on the thousands of salmon fighting their way upstream to spawn and die. My job was to make sure both the bears and the salmon stayed safe from human interference. The fishing boat showed up on a Tuesday morning. I spotted it through my binoculars from my observation post, a 30-foot commercial vessel called the Mary Catherine. 5 crew members aboard, which I could see clearly through the scope. They were anchored right in the middle of a restricted spawning area, about 2 miles downstream from Brooks Falls. This wasn't unusual. Every summer, commercial fishermen would accidentally drift into protected waters, hoping to net the massive salmon runs before anyone noticed. Usually, I'd radio the Coast Guard, and they'd get escorted out with a hefty fine. But something felt wrong from the start. The air was too still. Normally, you can hear the salmon jumping, thousands of them leaping upstream, slapping the water like gunshots. But the river had gone quiet. Even the bears seemed nervous, pacing the shoreline instead of wading in to fish. I radioed the boat. "This is Ranger Riverside, Katmai National Park Service. You're anchored in a restricted spawning area. Please move to open waters immediately." Static. Then a voice came through, scratchy and distant. "Copy that, Ranger. Just checking our nets. We'll be moving shortly." But they didn't move. Not for hours. By late afternoon, the fog started rolling in thick from the coast. This wasn't normal weather. It was August, supposed to be clear and warm. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the fog moved like it had a mind of its own, creeping up the river in fingers and tendrils. When I lost visual contact with the Mary Catherine, I waited until morning, thinking they'd either moved on or were just hidden by the fog. But when the sun burned through the mist, the boat was still there. Still anchored in the exact same spot. Still running. Engine humming, lights on, but nobody visible on deck. I grabbed my emergency radio, my bear spray, and my field kit, then launched my inflatable raft. The current was stronger than usual, fighting me as I paddled downstream. The salmon were acting strange too. Instead of swimming upstream to spawn, they were swimming in circles, like they were confused or trapped. When I reached the Mary Catherine, I could hear the engine rumbling, but the boat was completely still in the water. No movement, no voices, no sign of the crew. "Hello aboard," I called out. "This is Park Service." Nothing. I tied my raft to the stern and climbed aboard. The deck was wet but clean. No blood, no signs of struggle. The fishing nets were still deployed, but they were empty, except for a few dead salmon arranged in a perfect circle on the deck. Not dropped randomly, arranged, like someone had placed them there on purpose. Fixation, the wheelhouse was empty, but the radio was on, crackling with static. The engine controls were set to idle. Coffee was still warm in the pot. Personal belongings, wallets, car keys, a wedding ring, was scattered across the chart table like someone had emptied their pockets in a hurry. But no people. 5 experienced fishermen had simply vanished. Entire boat twice. Life jackets were still hanging on their hooks. The emergency raft was still strapped to the deck. If they'd abandoned ship, they would have taken something, anything. It was in the captain's logbook. The last entry, written in shaky handwriting, "Otters watching us. Too many otters. They stand up like people." Blinked, I looked out at the river. The fog was getting thicker, and I could hear something moving in the water. Splashing sounds, but not like salmon jumping, like something large swimming in organized patterns around the boat. Then I saw them. River otters. Dozens of them, floating on their backs in the current, watching me with dark, intelligent eyes. This wasn't normal otter behavior. They're usually shy around humans, diving and disappearing at the first sign of people. These otters weren't diving. They were staring. And some of them looked too big, too human. That's when I noticed the smell. Wet fur and something else. Something that reminded me of a morgue. Otters my whole career. They're playful, curious animals that hunt fish and build dens along riverbanks. They weigh maybe 30 pounds when fully grown, and they're about as threatening as a house cat. The otters surrounding the boat was going to explain them ship. There was the 30 challenges that water they work. Wet, fur, and they children the riverbanks. The otters surrounding the Mary Catherine were not normal. They floated in perfect formation, 3 circles around the boat, maybe 40 animals total. Their eyes never left me as I moved around the deck. When I walked to the port side, their heads turned to track my movement. When I went to starboard, they followed. The biggest ones were the size the boat Link World career, without she build rivermint. The biggest ones were the size the most linked to them fish, and they wouldn't be mite per rear. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. Without the river is the most scale on Havard. The pathants the deck there was the merry. The biggest ones were the size the most 40 animals. They still being survily, the sides of the boat. They were rivenin to floated. The otters were in the road of the boat, the different boat with a fish. They never left me. When I walked to the port side, they walked perfect formation. When I walked to the port side, they was surfily movement. When I went to the port side, they followed. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. When I went to the port side, they were followed. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. When I went to the port side, they were followed. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. When I went to the port side, they were followed. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. They would be surfily, the sides of the boat. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. But I walked to the port side, they were followed. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. The biggest ones were the size the most kind of a lurd. They would be surfily, the sides of the boat. Had never left me as I moved around the deck. When I walked to the port side, biggest ones were the size of seals, maybe 60, 70 pounds. Their faces looked wrong somehow, too expressive, too knowing. When one of them opened its mouth, I saw teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. Professionalism. I grabbed my camera and snapped photos, but the fog made everything blurry and strange. Through the viewfinder, some of the otters looked like they were standing upright in the water, balancing on their tails like dolphins. But when I lowered the camera, they were floating normally again. My radio crackled. "Riverside, this is Base. What's your status?" Redirect keyed the mic. "Base, this is Riverside. I'm aboard the commercial vessel that was anchored in restricted waters. The crew is missing, all 5 of them. No signs of struggle, no emergency signals. Request Coast Guard assistance." Mailed copy that. "Coast Guard notified. ETA 2 hours. Any indication of what happened to the crew?" I looked out at the otters. They were still watching me, still maintaining their formation. Unknown at this time, possible man overboard situation, but I paused. How do you explain that 5 experienced fishermen vanished without a trace, leaving behind coffee and car keys? I'll need a full search and rescue operation. Roger. Stay with the vessel. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant is en route. 2 hours. I had to stay on this boat for 2 hours, surrounded by otters that acted like they were planning something. I decided to search the boat more carefully. Maybe I'd missed something. A note, a sign of where the crew went, anything that would explain this rationally. Found the first real clue. Scratches on the metal hull, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. They started about 3 feet below the waterline and went all the way down to the keel. Whatever made those marks had been in the water, scraping at the bottom of the boat. But the scratches were too big for otter claws, too organized. They formed patterns, spirals and lines that almost looked like writing. In the galley, I found wet footprints on the floor, human-sized but with webbed toes. The prints led from the galley to the deck, then just stopped at the rail. Someone, or something, had climbed out of the water, walked through the boat, and gone back over the side. I followed the prints outside. They were still damp, even though it hadn't rained. At the stern, I found more evidence. Long, dark hairs caught on the fishing nets. Too coarse for human hair, too long for otter fur. The radio in the wheelhouse squawked with static, then cleared up enough for me to hear a voice. Help. Still in the water. Can't get out. The otters won't let us. Hello? I grabbed the handset. This is Ranger Riverside. Who is this? What's your position? Microphone more static then. Captain Mitchell. Mary Catherine. They took the others underwater. Trying to take me too. Brian's heart raced. Captain Mitchell, this is the Park Service. I'm on your boat right now. Where are you? Buffering the voice came through clearer now, desperate and terrified. Don't come in the water. Don't trust anything you see. They can look like people when they want to. They can sound
like people. But they're not people, they're...
The transmission cut off. I tried to raise him again, but got nothing except static. I switched to the emergency channel and called the Coast Guard directly. Coast Guard Station Kodiak, this is Park Ranger Catherine Riverside. I have a possible survivor in the water near coordinates. I read off the GPS position. Male voice claiming to be Captain Mitchell of the commercial vessel Mary Catherine. Request immediate assistance. Ranger Riverside, this is Kodiak. We have no radar contacts in your area except the vessel you're on. Are you certain about the transmission? I looked out at the water. The otters were still there, but now some of them were diving and surfacing in a rhythm that looked almost like they were communicating. When they surfaced, they'd make chittering sounds that carried across the water. But the sounds were too organized, too much like conversation. Kodiak, I'm certain. The voice was clear. He said the crew was taken underwater. Roger that. Vigilant is still 40 minutes out. Maintain your position and keep trying to establish contact. 40 minutes felt like a lifetime. As I watched, the fog began to lift slightly, and I could see farther across the river. About 100 yards downstream, I spotted something that made my blood freeze. Personal belongings lined up on the gravel beach in a perfect row. 5 sets of clothes neatly folded, 5 pairs of boots, lined up like soldiers, and 5 piles of what looked like bones, picked completely clean and arranged in small pyramids. The otters had made a shrine out of the crew. I grabbed my binoculars for a closer look, and that's when I saw him. A man standing waist-deep in the water near the bone piles, waving at me. He was wearing a captain's hat and a blue jacket, just like the fishing crews wore. "Captain Mitchell!" I shouted across the water. Well, he waved again, then pointed downstream and started walking toward shore. But as he moved through the water, something was wrong with the way he moved. Too fluid, too comfortable in the freezing river. When he reached the shallows, I could see him clearly through the binoculars. Hezbollah, as face was human, but his hands were webbed. His movements were graceful and strange, like he was swimming through air. and when he opened his mouth to call back to me, I could see rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Come help me," he called, his voice carrying perfectly across the water. "I'm hurt. I need help getting back to the boat." Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't Captain Mitchell. This wasn't human at all, but it sounded exactly like the voice on the radio. The voice's board moved for love, and across the fishing crew, I could see the set more of that. But it sounded exactly like this. His long was mating the water, and he opened his mouth through the boat. It hoped, and clearly, and speak to the shore. But it sounded exactly like this. The voice was clearly in the boat. But it sounded exactly like this. This was referted the mouth. The voice was meant to let the reference of the boat. But it was clearly, and he woke within own challengeship. Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't moded, this strange bevisual that warring him taking well. I take the boat of them, the particular revert. Readily the shore had, we have these videos of expective, but this wasn't human. A something that maybe wasn't his way from self, and had help. But it sound exactly like this. The voice was mental into the boat. I worked impact to the boat. Just across the water, it only this board as well of as mead. But it works to me that we currently speak at a possible for the water. Everything I did, that this is romance was screamed, that this wasn't moded, but it was wrong. But it sounded exactly like this. It was clearly, and he was mental was the help. But it sounded exactly like this. The boat still working the water, and he was braved, and he felt. "Come help me," he called. He's a very own challengeship. And two work in some of the wasteware. The pyramid something closely, that was really full accessible. This is religiously coming to the day, in a very way that opened his boat, and had bizarved beating the boat. The spiritical down, but it was the best of screamed, control in the water. "Come help me on me." This was blank. He's a very own challengeship. But it sounded exactly like this. It was really lowly dead. Readily the possible of the water, he had not have opened down. But it sounded exactly like this. It was really much. This was never discussed that way that you confident. It is no way that this was not about the because they work. The supporting themselves was completely moved. But it wasn't moved things that they would beat it. The boat stalled a water was not good in the boat. Of course, when he will be about boaters where they help, but it was mating where they would beat it. It was two instants of challenges, but is seen net on the radio. Right. I've dealt with dangerous situations before. Bears, rapids, hypothermic hikers, equipment failures miles from help. You learn to think fast and trust your training. But nothing in my training covered what to do when something inhuman calls for help using a dead man's
voice. The thing that looked like Captain Mitchell kept waving from the shore, occasionally shouting, "Please, I'm injured. The current's too strong." Kept the binoculars trained on him, studying every detail. From a distance, he looked like a man in distress. But the longer I watched, the more obvious it became that something was fundamentally wrong. His movements were too smooth, too fluid. When he stumbled in the current, he never actually lost his balance, and his eyes, even from 100 yards away, reflected light like an animal's. The radio crackled again. "Riverside, this is Jake Mendenhall. I'm flying search patterns about 5 miles east of your position. You copy?" Jake was a bush pilot who worked out of King Salmon, flew supplies and researchers to remote camps all over the region. Good man, experienced in these waters. "Jake, this is Riverside. Copy loud and clear. Listen, I've got a situation here. 5 missing fishermen, possible survivors in the water, but something's not right about." "Holy shit!" Jake's voice cut through the static, high and scared. "I'm seeing people in the water down here. Jesus, there's got to be a dozen of them, just swimming around in circles. In this cold water, they should be dead from hypothermia." My stomach dropped. "Jake, what's your exact position?" "Abandoned from you, near the big gravel bar. These people there, Christ, Catherine, they're swimming like dolphins, diving down,
coming up in different spots. Nobody can swim like that in these currents. I grabbed my field radio. Jake, listen to me carefully. Do not land near those swimmers. Do not attempt a water rescue. Those are not people. Powerless. Long pause. Then, what do you mean, not people? I'm looking at one right now that claims to be Captain Mitchell, but it's got webbed hands and shark teeth. Whatever those things are in the water, they're not human. Catherine, I can see them clearly. They're wearing clothes. They're waving at me. One of them looks like a woman in a red jacket. Northeast, the thing on shore had started walking along the beach, parallel to the boat. As it moved, more figures emerged from the water. 5, then 7, then 10 people, all waving and calling for help. All moving with that same unnatural grace, that same too perfect balance in the rushing current. Jake, I said, trust me on this. Whatever you're seeing down there, it's not what it looks like. Stay in the air. Forbidden. But if people are drowning... They're not drowning. It heard me. All the figures on shore turned to look directly at the Mary Catherine. Even from 100 yards away, I could see them smile in perfect unison, the same wide, predatory grin on every face. Then they dove back into the water and disappeared. Jake, I radioed, are your swimmers still visible? Negative. They all went under at the same
Time. Like they were synchronized or something. Catherine, what the hell is going on down there? Before I could answer, something bumped the bottom of the boat, hard. The entire vessel shuddered, and I heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the hull. Another bump, this time from the port side, then another from starboard. The Mary Catherine began to rock gently, as if something large was swimming underneath, brushing against the keel. I turned it on. The sonar screen lit up with contacts, dozens of them, circling beneath the boat in organized patterns. But these weren't fish. The shapes were too big, too deliberate in their movements, and they were ascending. Catherine? Jake's voice was tense. I'm seeing a lot of movement in the water around your position. Looks like a school of something really big. The first one broke the surface 20 feet off the bow. Not an otter, not human, something in between. It was the size of a large man but moved like a marine mammal, sleek and powerful in the water. Its body was covered in dark fur, but the face was disturbingly human-like, with intelligent eyes and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. When it saw me watching, it raised one webbed hand and waved, mimicking human behavior with obvious mockery. More of them surfaced, 12, 15, 20. They formed a circle around the boat, treading water with easy, powerful strokes. Some floated on their backs like otters. Others hung vertically in the water like seals. All of them watched me with those same intelligent, malevolent eyes. The largest one, maybe 7 feet tall, swam closer to the boat. When it spoke, its voice was perfect human English, but with an undertone that sounded like water running over rocks. You should not be here, Ranger Woman. This is our place, our time. I found my voice. What happened to the crew? Where are they? That might have been a smile. They took what was not theirs, the salmon, the sacred ones who come to die and be reborn. So we took them. Took them where? It gestured with one webbed hand toward the bottom of the river. To the deep places, to the caves beneath the water, where the salmon spirits live. They will stay there now. They will learn respect. Jake, I whispered into the radio, get the Coast Guard on the line. Tell them we need immediate assistance, armed assistance. Its head tilted, listening. Then it made a sound like laughter, wet and bubbling, like someone drowning in reverse. Your flying friend, it said. He sees my children downstream. Perhaps he would like to meet them personally. While the radio, Jake's voice suddenly turned panicked. Catherine, they're coming out of the water. Jesus Christ, they're climbing onto the beach. I'm getting out of here. Confiscated. I heard the sound of aircraft engine revving, then Jake screaming. Something I couldn't make out. Static filled the radio, then silence.
Jake! Jake, respond!
Nothing. The creature in the water smiled wider.
He will join the fishermen soon, and then you, Ranger woman, unless you leave. Now. I looked around the boat, desperate for anything that could serve as a weapon. Flare gun, emergency axe, bear spray. Nothing that would stop 20 supernatural predators in their own element. But I remembered used to tell. The Kushtakar were spirits, but they followed rules. They had purposes, boundaries, weaknesses. I asked. Windshield. Justice, the creature said. The salmon are sacred. They die so that life continues. But the fish-takers steal them before the death time, before the giving back. This breaks the circle, so we make it whole again. The commercial fishermen broke your laws. Yes, and now you know our laws. Leave. Tell others. The river remembers. The river protects itself. The engine of the Mary Catherine suddenly roared to life, even though I was nowhere near the controls. The anchor chain began to rattle as it was pulled up from the bottom, not by any mechanism I could see, but by webbed hands reaching up from the depths. Your choice, Ranger woman. Swim to shore and walk away, or stay and feed the salmon spirits. The boat was already moving, being pushed by invisible hands toward the deeper, faster water downstream. In 5 minutes I'd be in the rapids where no human could survive. But if I jumped overboard, I'd be in the water with them. That's when I heard the Coast Guard helicopter approaching from the north. The helicopter appeared through the fog like salvation itself. A bright orange Sikorsky with U.S. Coast Guard painted in bold letters on its side. I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. But the creatures in the water didn't seem concerned. If anything, they looked pleased. The largest one, the one who'd been speaking to me, turned toward the approaching aircraft and made a series of clicking sounds. The others responded immediately, diving beneath the surface in perfect coordination. Within seconds, the water around the Mary Catherine looked completely normal. No sign that 20 supernatural predators had been circling moments before. Coast Guard Rescue, this is Ranger Catherine Riverside aboard the vessel Mary Catherine, I radioed. Ranger Riverside, this is Lieutenant Commander Davis. We have you visual. Are you in immediate danger? I looked at the empty water, the fog-shrouded river, the boat that was somehow moving downstream without anyone at the controls. How do you explain the impossible to people who live in the rational world? Confiscated. I need immediate extraction, I said. The crew of this vessel is missing, presumed dead, and there are dangerous animals in the water. Blasted that. We're coming in for pickup. Belongings. The helicopter descended
Toward the boat, its rotor wash beating the fog away and churning the river surface into white caps. I grabbed my pack and moved toward the stern, ready to clip into their rescue harness. That's when I saw the pilot through the cockpit window. It was Jake Mendenhall. He waved at me cheerfully, his face completely normal, except for the fact that his eyes were solid black, like an otter's, and his smile showed too many teeth. "Catherine," he called over the helicopter's noise. "Thanks for calling us in. Everything's going to be fine now." My blood turned to ice water. Whatever had happened to Jake, these things could pilot aircraft. They could use radios. They could impersonate Coast Guard rescue operations. I keyed my radio. "Coast Guard Station Kodiak, this is Ranger Riverside. I need authentication on the rescue helicopter at my position. Badge number and crew identification." Static filled the frequency. "Ranger Riverside? That aircraft is not one of ours. Repeat, that is not a Coast Guard helicopter." The fake Jake's smile faltered for just a moment. Then it widened into something horrible. "Don't make this difficult, Catherine," he said, his voice now carrying that same wet undertone as the creature in the water. "We can do this easy or hard, but you're coming with us either way." The helicopter moved closer, and I could see that the rescue crew in the back were more of the otter-human hybrids, their fur wet and dripping onto the aircraft's floor. One of them held a rescue harness, but its claws had shredded the safety straps. I ran for the wheelhouse and grabbed the flare gun. If these things could bleed, maybe they could die. In the chest, and he screamed, not with pain, but with rage.
The helicopter lurched sideways, and I could see his true form flickering through the human disguise like a bad television signal. Fur, teeth, eyes like black marbles. But the aircraft didn't crash. If anything, it steadied out faster than any human pilot could have managed. "Now you've made it hard," fake Jake snarled, his voice echoing strangely through the radio. The helicopter's rescue winch deployed, but instead of a harness, it lowered something that looked like a fishing net made of kelp and bones. As it descended toward the boat, I could smell the ocean depths, salt and decay, and things that lived in absolute darkness. I fired another flare at the aircraft, but this one passed right through the fuselage like it wasn't really there. The helicopter was an illusion. The Coast Guard uniforms, Jake's familiar face, even the aircraft itself, all of it was a trick to get me to trust them, to willingly climb into their trap. But the real Coast Guard was still coming. I could hear another helicopter approaching from the south, its engine sound different from the Phantom aircraft hovering above me.
Heard it too. His expression turned furious.
"Time's up, Ranger woman. Come to the water now, or we'll drag you down with the boat." Bundy, that Mary Catherine, suddenly lurched forward as something massive struck the hull from below. The deck tilted at a steep angle, and I realized they were ramming holes in the bottom. The boat was sinking. Water rushed in the brakes, but spiral patterns that matched the claw marks I'd found earlier. These creatures could tear through metal and wood like it was paper. I had maybe 2 minutes before the boat went down completely. The real Coast Guard helicopter appeared through the fog, and I could see actual human faces in the cockpit. No black eyes, no predatory grins, just professional concern and determination. But I was still trapped between two impossible choices: drown with the boat or go into the water where the creatures were waiting. That's when I remembered something else from the native stories. The Kushtaka were bound to protect the salmon runs, but they could be reasoned with. They followed old laws, ancient agreements between humans and the spirits of the water. As the boat listed further, I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted at the water, "I want to make a deal." The stopped. The Phantom helicopter flickered and vanished. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The largest creature surfaced again, its human-like face curious. "What kind of deal, Ranger woman?" "Your laws," I said, "but I'm here to enforce different laws. Laws that protect the salmon too. Laws that keep people out of your sacred places." "Explain." "I can make this entire river system off-limits to commercial fishing. I can put markers warning people away from the spawning grounds. I can make sure humans respect the old boundaries." The creature considered this, its head tilting like an intelligent animal processing new information. "And in return?" "You let me go. You stop killing people. You protect the salmon runs the way they're meant to be protected, by keeping them secret, not by feeding fishermen to them." The real Coast Guard helicopter was hovering overhead now, its rescue swimmer preparing to deploy. But the creatures hadn't attacked it, which meant they were actually listening. "The salmon spirits accept this bargain," the large creature finally said. "But if humans break the boundaries again, if they take the sacred fish during the death time, we will take them in return. This is the old law. And you will remember, Ranger woman. You will tell others. The river has guardians now. The water is not empty." I nodded. "I'll remember." The creature smiled, genuinely this time, not the predatory grimace from before. "Then swim to your flying friends. We will not follow." I dove overboard as the Mary Catherine finally slipped beneath the surface. The water was shockingly cold, but I made it to the Coast Guard rescue basket without any supernatural interference. As they pulled me up into the helicopter, I looked down at the river. The creatures were gone, but I could see dark shapes moving beneath the surface, escorting us toward shore like an honor guard. The official report was clean and simple. Commercial fishing vessel Mary Catherine suffered catastrophic hull failure in restricted waters. 5 crew members lost, presumed drowned. Pilot Jake Mendenhall crashed his aircraft during search operations, also presumed dead. Equipment failure and severe weather cited as contributing factors. Psychologist. No mention of Kushtaka, no mention of impossible creatures or supernatural encounters, just another tragedy in dangerous Alaskan waters. But the restrictions I'd promised went into effect within a month. The entire Naknek River system above Brooks Falls became a no-fishing zone, protected by federal law. Permanent rangers were stationed at key access points. Commercial fishing licenses for the region were quietly revoked. The official reason was salmon conservation, declining spawn counts, environmental protection, scientific research. All true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd made a deal with the guardians of the deep water. I stayed in Alaska for 3 more years after that, but I never went back to that stretch of the Naknek River. Other rangers covered that territory, and I made sure they knew the rules. No camping near the spawning grounds, no night patrols during salmon runs, and absolutely no exceptions for anyone wanting to fish the restricted waters. There were rumors, of course. Fishermen claimed to see large shapes moving under their boats in areas that had been fished safely for decades. Hikers reported finding circles of salmon bones arranged on gravel beaches. Bush pilots swore they'd seen people swimming impossibly well in water cold enough to kill a man in minutes. But the salmon runs came back stronger than ever. The bears grew fat and healthy. The ecosystem flourished in ways that surprised even the scientists. In 1982, I transferred to Yellowstone National Park. Grizzlies and geysers seemed safer than shape-shifting water spirits. But even now, 40 years later, I still get reports from Alaska. Still hear stories that remind me of that August day when I learned that some places in the wilderness aren't empty at all. They're just protected by things we don't understand. Last month, a young park ranger called me from Katmai. She'd found my name in old files and wanted advice about unusual wildlife behavior near Brooks Falls. Otters acting strangely, salmon swimming in patterns that didn't make biological sense, commercial fishermen reporting equipment failures and missing time near certain stretches of river. I told her what I tell everyone who asks. Respect the water. Follow the regulations. Don't fish where you're not
supposed to fish. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, something that seems too intelligent to be just an animal, don't try to understand it. Just remember that you're a guest in their territory. The salmon run spirits are still there, still watching, still protecting what's sacred to them. The old agreements hold, but only as long as we keep our end of the bargain. The river remembers everything, and it's not empty.
My name is Marcus Icewalker, and I've been a park ranger at Denali for 21 years. People always ask about my last name. It comes from my grandfather, who was full Athabascan. He used to tell stories about spirits that lived in the ice, but I never believed them. Not until April of 1983. I've done over 200 mountain rescues in my time. I know every crevasse on Ruth Glacier, every safe route up the peaks around Mount McKinley. I've written guides on ice climbing, trained other rangers, survived an avalanche in '81 that should have killed me. When people get in trouble on the ice, they call me. Thermostat started like any other rescue call. 7 climbers from a mountaineering club in Anchorage had missed their check-in. Their names were Brad Morrison, Janet Foster, Tommy Richardson, Lisa Chang, Dave Anderson, Rita Powell, and their guide, Dana Whitehorse. Dana was someone I knew, a good climber, careful, not the type to take stupid risks. Weather had been bad for 3 days. Spring breakup always makes the ice unstable, opens new cracks, shifts the safe routes. But these folks were experienced. They should have known to hunker down and wait it out. I loaded my gear into the ski plane and flew out to their last known position on Ruth Glacier. The pilot, Jimmy Crow Feather, has been flying these mountains longer than I've been walking them. As we circled the glacier, he pointed down at the blue ice. "Something's wrong with the formations down there," he said. "I've flown over this glacier 1,000 times. Those crevasses weren't there last week." She looked down and saw what he meant. Fresh cracks had opened in a spiral pattern, like someone had drawn them with a giant finger. The ice looked different too, bluer somehow, almost glowing in the morning light. Jimmy dropped me off at base camp, where I found their tents still standing. Everything looked normal at first. Sleeping bags laid out, food hanging in bear bags, climbing gear organized and ready. But something felt off. The air was too quiet, too cold. Even the ravens weren't calling. Then I found the first strange thing. Their ice axes were gone, but I could see marks in the ice where they'd been driven deep into the ground. The marks formed a perfect circle around the camp. What kind of climbers would waste time making patterns in the ice? Barber out their names, but my voice just echoed off the glacier walls and died. The silence that came back felt hungry somehow, like it was waiting for something. I checked their route plan. They were heading for an ice cave system about 2 miles up glacier, planning to map some new formations. I'd been in those caves before. They were safe enough if you knew what you were doing. But as I looked up toward where they should have gone, I saw those new spiral cracks cutting right across their planned route. The ice was moving wrong. I could feel it under my boots, shifting in ways that didn't make some
sense. Glaciers move, sure, but slowly, inches per day, not the constant creaking and groaning I was hearing now. It sounded almost like breathing. "This is Ice Walker. Found the base camp intact, but no sign of the missing party. Ice conditions are unstable. Requesting backup." The radio crackled back with static, then silence. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind chimes made of ice, coming from the direction of the caves. Beautiful and cold and completely wrong for this place. My grandfather's voice whispered in the back of my mind. "The ice remembers everything it touches, Marcus. And sometimes it doesn't want to let go." I shouldered my pack and started up the glacier alone. The ice axes in my hands felt heavier than usual, and every step forward made the temperature drop another degree. Behind me, my footprints filled with new snow, even though the sky was clear. The climb up to the cave system should have taken an hour. I'd done it dozens of times, could do it with my eyes closed. But the route kept changing. Cracks that should have been narrow were wide enough to swallow a truck. Safe ice bridges had collapsed. New crevasses opened where solid ground used to be. I had to rope up 3 times just to cross gaps that hadn't existed on my maps. Each time, as I hammered in the ice screws for anchors, I noticed something strange. The ice was warm. Not melting warm, but body warm, like it was alive. Halfway up, I found Tommy Richardson's climbing helmet. It was sitting on top of a snowdrift, perfectly clean and undamaged. Inside it, carved into the plastic with surgical precision, were symbols I didn't recognize, curved lines that looked almost like writing. The helmet was still warm. I called out again, "Tommy, can you hear me?" This time I got an answer. It was Tommy's voice, clear as day, coming from somewhere ahead. "Marcus? Thank God. We're down in the caves. Everyone's hurt bad. You need to hurry." I moved faster, following his voice deeper into the ice maze. But something was wrong with what he was saying. His voice was too calm for someone with injured teammates, too steady. And he knew my name, even though we'd never met. The cave entrance looked different from the last time I'd seen it. Bigger, carved into smooth curves that seemed too perfect for natural ice. Symbols were etched around the opening, the same curved lines I'd seen in Tommy's helmet. "Tommy!" I called into the cave. "Where are you?" "Down here," his voice echoed back. "Follow my voice, but be careful. The ice is unstable." I clipped my headlamp on and entered the cave. The walls glowed with that strange blue light I'd seen from the plane. The ice was so clear I could see deep into it, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving inside. Dark forms like people walking around under the surface. 20 feet in, I found Janet Foster's camera. It was hanging from an ice formation, the strap frozen solid to the wall. But the camera itself was still running. The little red light blinked on and off in the blue darkness. I picked it up and hit playback. The tiny screen showed shaky footage of the team setting up camp, laughing and joking around. Then the view swung to show the cave entrance, and Janet's voice said, "Something's moving in there. Do you guys see that?"
The camera focused on the cave mouth, and I saw what she meant. Shapes were moving inside the ice, getting closer to the surface. Beautiful shapes, like dancers frozen mid-step. Then Janet screamed, and the camera dropped, showing nothing but spinning ice and darkness. "Mask," Tommy's voice again, closer now. "Why did you stop? We need help." For I called back, but my voice cracked. "Tommy, where exactly are you? I found Janet's camera." "Just keep following the main passage, you can't miss us." But I was starting to think I could miss them, that maybe I should miss them, because Tommy's voice was coming from deeper in the cave, and the footprints I was following in the snow didn't look quite right. They were the right size for climbing boots, but they had no tread marks, just smooth, cold impressions, like they'd been pressed into the ice by something that had never worn real boots. I found Dave Anderson's rope next, 50 feet of climbing rope cut into perfect spirals and arranged in a pattern on the cave floor. Each piece was exactly the same length. No climber cuts rope like that. No sane person has time to measure and arrange gear when their team is in trouble. The rope was covered in ice, but underneath I could see it was stained dark red. "Tommy!" I called again. This time, a different voice answered. Janet's voice. "He can't talk right now, Marcus, but I can. Keep coming. It's beautiful down here. The ice is so blue, so perfect. You'll love it." That's when I knew for certain that something was very, very wrong. Because I'd just watched Janet's camera footage. I'd heard her scream. And voices don't sound that calm and happy when they're hurt and trapped in ice caves. I turned around and started back toward the entrance. Behind me, more voices started calling. "Marcus, don't leave us. We're so cold. Please help. The ice lady wants to meet you." That last one was Tommy's voice again, but he'd said something that made my blood freeze. Ice lady. My grandfather had told stories about her, Yuki Onna, the snow woman who collected travelers and kept them in her frozen kingdom forever. I ran for the cave entrance, but the passage had changed. Where there should have been a straight tunnel back to daylight, I found 3 different passages, all leading deeper into the glacier. The symbols on the walls were glowing brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. I picked the passage that felt like it angled upward and ran. My headlamp beam bounced off the walls, showing me glimpses of things.
That couldn't be real. Faces in the ice, watching me pass. Hands pressed against the frozen walls from inside. Eyes that tracked my movement. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper instead of up toward daylight. Every few yards, I found more gear from the missing team. A crampon here, an energy bar there, all arranged in careful patterns. Someone, or something, was leaving me a trail. Bypass, I stopped to catch my breath and noticed that the walls were moving, not shifting like normal ice, but actually flowing, reshaping themselves while I watched. The cave was changing around me, cutting off my escape routes. That's when I heard the new sound, laughter, light and musical, coming from ahead. A woman's laughter, beautiful and terrifying. It echoed off the ice walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You can stop running now, Marcus," a voice called. Not one of the climbers this time. This voice was older, with an accent I couldn't place. "I've been waiting so long to meet you. Your grandfather told such wonderful stories about you." Congressional had been dead for 15 years. I kept moving, but the passage opened into a huge chamber I'd never seen before. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the floor was covered with ice formations that looked like furniture, chairs and tables and beds, all carved from the glacier itself. In the center of the chamber sat 7 figures, arranged in a circle, the missing climbing team. They looked peaceful, like they were just resting, but they weren't breathing, and their skin had turned the same blue as the glacier ice. "They're not dead," the woman's voice said, and I spun around to see her standing behind me. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Tall and graceful,
with long black hair that seemed to move like it was underwater. Her skin was pale as snow, and her eyes were the deep blue of glacier ice. She wore a dress that looked like it was made from frozen mist, and when she moved, I could hear the sound of wind through ice caves. I saw the truth. Her dress wasn't made of mist. It was made of faces. Hundreds of tiny faces trapped in the fabric, their mouths open in silent screams. "I am what your people call Yuki Onna," she said, smiling. "The Ice Woman, the collector of souls. Your grandfather knew my true name, but he was wise enough never to speak it aloud." I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The ice had grown up around my boots, holding me in place. "These 7, she gestured to the climbers. "They came looking for adventure. They found something much better. They found purpose. They're part of me now, part of my growing army, and they're so much happier than they were before." One of the climbers, Brad Morrison, opened his eyes and looked at me. His eyes were solid blue, like looking into deep ice. "She's right, Marcus. The cold doesn't hurt anymore. Nothing hurts anymore. You should
Join us.
The ice around my feet started climbing higher, reaching my knees. It was warm instead of cold, and where it touched me, I felt a terrible peace trying to wash over my mind. "I've been collecting mountaineers and climbers for over a century," Yuki Onna said, walking closer. "They understand the mountains, respect the ice. They make the best soldiers for my winter army. But you, Marcus Icewalker, you're special. Your grandfather's blood runs in your veins. You can hear the ice singing." And I could hear it. A low, beautiful song that seemed to come from the glacier itself. It was calling me to stop fighting, to let the ice take me, to become part of something larger and more beautiful than my small human life. "Your friends here tried to resist at first," she said, reaching out to touch Brad's face. "But the ice is patient. The ice always wins. They understand now that I'm not taking their lives. I'm preserving them, making them eternal." Lisa Chang opened her eyes next, then Dave Anderson. One by one, all 7 climbers turned to look at me with those terrible blue eyes. "Psychologist." "Join us," they said in unison. "The ice is beautiful. The ice is home." Reached my waist now, and I could feel my strength draining away. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The ice remembers everything it touches, Marcus. But it also has weaknesses. The old spirits respect those who know the proper offerings." I reached into my pack with numb fingers and pulled out the emergency dynamite I carried for avalanche control. "You want an offering?" I shouted. "Here's your offering." Yuki Onna's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked afraid. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand enough," I said, pulling the pin. "My grandfather taught me that some ice needs to break before spring can come." The explosion tore through the chamber like thunder. Ice chunks the size of cars crashed down from the ceiling, and cracks shot up the walls like lightning. Yuki Onna screamed, a sound like a blizzard wind, and her beautiful form started to flicker and fade. The ice around my legs shattered, freeing me to run. But the whole glacier was groaning now, shifting and collapsing. New crevasses opened under my feet, and I had to jump from chunk to chunk of stable ice. "You think you can destroy me with fire and noise?" Yuki Onna's voice followed me as I ran. "I am the glacier itself. I am winter eternal. You have only made me angry." Swelling. She was right. The explosion had damaged her ice palace, but I could feel her reforming behind me, gathering power from the glacier's heart. The walls started closing in, trying to crush me before I could reach the surface. I found another passage leading up and took it, even though I could hear her coming after me. The sound was like an avalanche in slow motion, ice grinding against ice, getting louder and closer. "Your grandfather tried to warn people about me," her voice echoed through the tunnels. But no one listened. They kept coming to my mountains, bringing me fresh souls to collect. And now, his grandson will join them. The passage split into 2 directions. I went left and found myself in another chamber. this one filled with ice sculptures. But as my headlamp swept across them, I realized they weren't sculptures. They were people, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all perfectly preserved in clear ice. Some wore modern climbing gear, others had equipment from decades past. In the back, I saw figures in furs and traditional Athabascan clothing. She'd been collecting people for longer than just a century. "My museum," Yuki Onna said, materializing beside a frozen climber from the 1960s. "Every soul tells a story. Every face holds a memory. Your grandfather's father is here somewhere. Would you like to see him?" I didn't stop to look. I ran for the far side of the chamber, where another passage led upward, toward what I hoped was the surface. But the ice was fighting me now, making the floor slippery, opening cracks to slow me down. Behind me, I heard Yuki Onna's laughter. "You cannot outrun winter, Marcus Ice Walker, and you cannot destroy what has always been." She was right about that too. But maybe I didn't need to destroy her. Maybe I just needed to change the game. I reached into my pack and pulled out my flare gun. Instead of shooting it ahead to light my way, I pointed it back at her chamber, full of preserved souls. Her voice was sharp now, worried. "Setting them free," I said, and pulled the trigger. The flare streaked through the chamber and hit the ice wall where the oldest figures were preserved. The red fire spread across the surface, and I heard something I'd never heard before. The ice screaming. Blinds. Not Yuki Onna screaming. The ice itself. Cracks spiderwebbed across the preserved figures, and suddenly the chamber filled with voices. Dozens of people calling out in languages I didn't recognize, thanking me, saying goodbye. "No!" Yuki Onna shrieked, and I felt the entire glacier shudder. "They are mine." But the damage was spreading. The fire from the flare was melting the ancient ice, freeing souls that had been trapped for generations. And with each one that broke free, I felt Yuki Onna getting weaker. I ran for the surface while she was distracted, following the sound of wind that meant open air. Behind me, the glacier groaned and cracked as it lost the power that had held it together for so long. I reached the cave entrance just as the whole system started to collapse. The spiral cracks I'd seen from the plane were spreading, cutting the glacier into pieces. I jumped across a widening crevasse and rolled away from the cave mouth as it caved in. The silence that followed was different from before. Natural, empty. The hungry feeling was gone. But as I gathered my gear to head back to base camp, I heard one last
sound from deep in the ice. Yuki Onna's voice, faint but clear. "This is not over, grandson of stories. Winter always returns." I made it back to base camp as the sun was setting. Jimmy Crow Feather's plane was waiting for me, and his face was grim when he saw I was alone. "The others?" he asked. I shook my head. The ice took them, all 7. We flew back to Talkeetna in silence. I could see the damage to Ruth Glacier from the air. Huge cracks cutting across the blue ice, pieces of the glacier that had broken away and tumbled into the valleys below. It would take years for the ice to resettle into a stable formation. The official report was simple. Climbing accident, glacier instability, bodies unrecoverable. The route was declared permanently unsafe, and climbing permits for that section were suspended indefinitely. That suited me fine. But I knew the truth. Yuki Onna was still down there, weaker but not gone, waiting for the glacier to reform, for new climbers to come seeking adventure in her frozen kingdom. The ice remembers everything, just like my grandfather said. And some memories never die. I retired from active rescue work 6 months later. Now I teach climbing safety and traditional mountaineering respect. I tell people about reading ice conditions, about understanding weather patterns, about the importance of respecting the mountain spirits. Most of them think I'm just a colorful old ranger with too many stories. But sometimes, when I see that hungry look in a young climber's eyes, that need to conquer the mountains instead of work with them, I tell them about Yuki Onna, about the ice lady who collects souls. Some listen, some don't. The ones who don't usually end up reading about glacial instability and unexplained disappearances in other parts of Alaska. Because Yuki Onna isn't the only ice spirit in these mountains.
She's just the one my family knew about. Month, I got a call from a ranger in Glacier Bay. 3 ice climbers had gone missing, and their gear had been found arranged in spiral patterns around their camp. The ice formations had changed overnight, and new crevasses had opened across their planned route. "Any advice?" the ranger asked me. "Stay away from the blue ice," I told him. "And if you hear voices calling from the crevasses, don't answer. The ice remembers everything it touches, and sometimes it doesn't want to let go." I still live in Alaska, still guide the occasional climbing party up the safer peaks. But I never go back to Ruth Glacier. The route is still marked as permanently closed, and that's how it should stay. Sometimes, on very cold nights when the wind sounds like voices in the darkness, I think about those 7 climbers, about whether they're still down there in the ice, dreaming blue dreams of eternal winter. And sometimes I wonder if they're happy. But mostly, I just make sure my doors are locked and my fires are burning bright. Because winter always returns, just like she said, and the ice never forgets. My name is Thomas Nightwolf, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. People always ask about the name. It comes from my Tlingit grandfather, who said I had the eyes of a wolf that could see in the dark. For most of my life, I thought it was just a nice story. I work in Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska, specifically the Copper River region. It's one of the most remote places you can imagine, 120 miles from the nearest town, and when winter hits, there's no road access at all. Just you, the wilderness, and whatever's out there in the dark. October 1988 was when everything changed. The days were getting shorter, fast, and the first real snow had already fallen. I was stationed at the Copper River Ranger Cabin, a small log building that served as my base for tracking wildlife and managing the few hunting parties that came through before winter locked everything down. I specialized in large predators, bears mostly, but also wolves. After 18 years, I thought I knew everything about wolf behavior. I'd tracked hundreds of packs, documented their territories, even published a few papers on pack dynamics. Wolves were predictable to me. They hunted in patterns, avoided humans when possible, and followed the same basic rules that had kept them alive for thousands of years. My uncle Samuel used to tell me stories when I was a kid. Stories about the Amarok, giant wolves that hunted humans. He said they were the spirits of ancient warriors, still protecting the old hunting grounds. "Some wolves are bigger than horses," he'd say, his old eyes serious in the firelight. "They think like men, but hunt like wolves. They remember every slight against their people." I always thought he was just trying to keep me from wandering too far into the woods alone. The rational part of my brain, the part with a degree in wildlife management, knew that wolves were just animals. Smart animals, sure, but animals nonetheless. They didn't have supernatural powers, they didn't carry grudges, they certainly weren't spirits. I should have listened to my uncle. The 15th, crackling through my radio just after sunset. A hunting party of 6 had failed to check in. They were experienced outdoorsmen, led by Bill Crawford, a guide who'd been working these mountains for over 20 years. Bill knew the country better than almost anyone, and he never missed a check-in. The party had been hunting in Devil's Creek Valley, about 15 miles north of my cabin. It was good hunting ground. Lots of caribou and moose moved through there during the fall migration. But it was also isolated, surrounded by thick spruce forest and steep mountain walls. Blinking, I grabbed my gear and headed out on my snowmobile just after dawn. The morning was eerily quiet. No birds, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even my snowmobile seemed too loud, like I was disturbing something that demanded silence. The ride to Devil's Creek usually took about an hour, but I kept having to stop. My machine kept acting up, sputtering and dying for no reason I could figure out. Each time I stopped, the silence pressed in around me like a weight. The kind of silence that makes you check over your shoulder, even when you know you're alone. When I finally reached their camp, I knew immediately something was very wrong. The first thing I noticed was the smell, metallic and sharp, cutting through the clean scent of snow and pine. Then I saw the torn tents, scattered like old newspapers in the wind. Gear was scattered everywhere, but not randomly. It looked almost arranged. I found Bill Crawford first. He was about 50 yards from camp, lying face down in the snow. When I turned him over, my stomach lurched. His throat had been torn out, but the wounds were massive, much larger than any wolf attack I'd ever seen. The bite radius was enormous, like something the size of a grizzly had grabbed him, but the teeth marks were all wrong, too sharp, too organized. I forced myself to examine the scene professionally, taking photos and measurements like I'd been trained, but my hands were shaking, and not from the cold. The tracks around Bill's body were what really got to me. Wolf prints, but wrong in every possible way. They were huge, nearly 8 inches long, and the stride length between them was impossible, 6 feet apart. I'd never seen anything like it. I followed the tracks back toward camp, documenting everything. 5 more bodies, all killed the same way. Mike Peterson, the assistant guide, had been dragged from a tree stand 20 feet off the ground. The branches were snapped off where something had climbed up to get him. But the worst part wasn't the bodies. It was how quiet everything was. In 18 years of working predator attacks, I'd never seen a kill site where the scavengers stayed away. Ravens should have been everywhere. Wolverines, foxes, even mice. Something should have been cleaning up. But there was nothing. Like even the carrion eaters knew to avoid this place. I was taking measurements of the tracks when I heard it. A low whine, coming from a cluster of fallen trees about 100 yards away. Human, but barely. I found Jake Rasmussen wedged under a pile of deadfall, hypothermic and delirious, but alive. He'd been the camp cook, a quiet guy in his 30s who mostly kept to himself. Now his eyes were wide and unfocused, and he kept mumbling the same thing over and over. Their eyes, they had human eyes. And started a fire to warm him up. It took almost an hour before he could speak clearly, and when he did, I wished he couldn't. They weren't normal wolves, Thomas, he said, his voice shaking. They were huge, bigger than any animal I've ever seen. But that's not the worst part. They hunted us like they were planning it. They knew what we were going to do before we did it. I tried to keep him calm while I treated his minor injuries. Jake, you've been out here all night in freezing weather. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. No! He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Listen to me. We set up in the usual spot, right? Bill had us positioned for the caribou run. Everything was normal until yesterday evening. That's when the other wolves left. Other wolves? There was a pack denned up about a mile north of here. We'd been seeing them for 3 days. Normal wolves, maybe 6 or 7 of them. But yesterday evening they all just left, like they were running from something. I nodded, making notes. That was unusual behavior, but not impossible. Then it got quiet. Not normal quiet, dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Bill said something was wrong, but we figured it was just weather moving in. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. That night, we started hearing them, howling but different, like they were talking to each other. Wolves communicate through howling all the time. Not like this. His eyes met mine, completely serious. They were coordinating, setting up positions around our camp. I swear to God, Thomas, they were planning an attack like soldiers. I finished bandaging a cut on his forehead, trying to process what he was telling me. Wolves were intelligent hunters, but what Jake was describing sounded more like military tactics. Bill decided we should move at first light. We started breaking camp just before dawn. That's when they hit us. Jake's whole body started shaking again. 6 of them, but they weren't like any wolves I've ever seen. They were massive, 5 feet tall at the shoulder at least, black as midnight, with these red eyes that seemed to glow. Red eyes? I'd seen eyeshine from nocturnal animals plenty of times, but it was usually green or yellow. Bright red, like coals in a fire, and they moved. God, the way they moved. It was coordinated, like they'd practiced it. 2 came from the front to drive us back, 2 from each flank to cut off escape routes. They herded us like cattle. I radioed for a helicopter evacuation while Jake continued his story. The more he talked, the less sense it made from a wildlife perspective, but the more it matched the evidence I was seeing. Bill tried to fight them off with his rifle. He got off 3 shots, hit one of them center mass. Should have dropped it instantly. But it just shook it off and kept coming. That's when I realized these weren't normal animals. What do you mean? Normal wolves would have scattered after gunshots. These ones seemed to get angry, like they took it personally. Jake was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. The one Bill shot looked right at me. I know that sounds crazy, but it looked at me like it was memorizing my face, like it was deciding whether to kill me now or save me for later. The helicopter couldn't land due to weather, so I had to get Jake back to the cabin on my snowmobile. During the ride, I kept thinking about what he'd said. 18 years of experience told me he was suffering from trauma and exposure, seeing patterns that weren't really there. But the evidence at the scene told a different story. Back at the cabin, I spread out my photos and measurements on the kitchen table. The tracks were consistent, all from the same pack, all impossibly large. The attack pattern showed coordination I'd never seen from wolves before. And there was something else bothering me. Blazing. I pulled out my trail camera memory cards from the surrounding area. I'd had cameras positioned throughout the valley to monitor wildlife movement. What I saw on those cards made my blood run cold. Most of the images were normal. Caribou, a few moose, some smaller predators. But starting 3 days ago, there were images that made no sense. Dark shapes moving between trees, but the camera's infrared flash seemed to be absorbed by them. Instead of the bright eyeshine I expected, there were just black silhouettes with 2 red dots where eyes should be. In one image, taken the night before the attack, I could see 6 shapes arranged in a perfect semicircle around the hunter's camp. They were positioned exactly where Jake said they'd heard howling. But they were sitting upright, almost like they were having a meeting. I enhanced the images on my computer, trying to get better detail. What I saw made me question my own sanity. The shapes were definitely wolves, but their posture was all wrong. They sat like humans, alert and attentive. In the clearest image, one appeared to be looking directly at the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. Forever. That night, I called my Uncle Samuel. If these stories about Amarok had any basis in reality, he'd know. "Tommy," he said after I'd explained what happened, "how well do you know the old boundaries?" "What boundaries?" "The hunting boundaries our people agreed to with the spirits. Devil's Creek was always forbidden during the dark months. The warriors who died protecting those lands, they never left." I tried to explain that I didn't believe in spirits, but Samuel interrupted me. "What you believe doesn't matter to them. What matters is that someone violated the treaty. They'll come for anyone who was involved. In whatever happened here before, he was hunting in their territory. That makes him involved. And Thomas," Samuel's voice got very serious, "if you keep investigating this, they'll come for you too." Plumbing. I should have listened to Samuel and called in the state troopers to handle the scene. I should have taken Jake to town and let someone else deal with whatever was happening in Devil's Creek. But 18 years of professional pride wouldn't let me walk away from the biggest mystery of my career. The next morning, I went back to the attack site with better equipment. I had a theory that maybe we were dealing with a hybrid, wolves crossbred with dogs or even bears. It would explain the size and unusual behavior. I set up new trail cameras and took plaster casts of the clearest tracks. That's when I found the den. It was about 2 miles north of the attack site, hidden in a cluster of rock formations I'd somehow missed on my first sweep. The entrance was enormous, big enough for a person to walk through upright. But it was what was inside that nearly made me turn around and run. The den went back about 30 feet into the rocks, opening into a natural chamber the size of a small room. And it was full of bones. human bones, arranged in patterns that definitely weren't random. Rib cages formed circles, skulls were stacked in neat pyramids. Long bones were laid out in geometric designs that hurt to look at. Some of the bones were old, decades, maybe longer, but some were fresh. I recognized clothing fragments from the hunting party scattered throughout the arrangement. I was photographing the bone patterns when I heard scratching sounds coming from deeper in the cave system. Something large was moving around back there, and it was coming closer. The den and set up position behind a boulder about 50 yards away. I had my rifle ready and my radio in hand to call for backup. But what emerged from that cave made me forget about everything except pure, primitive terror. It was a wolf, but calling it that was like calling a grizzly bear a house cat. It stood at least 5 feet tall at the shoulder, with a body as long as a small car. Its fur was black as midnight, and when it turned to look in my direction, its eyes glowed red like hot coals. But the intelligence in those eyes was what really got to me. It looked at me the way a human would, assessing, calculating, deciding what to do. And then it did something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. Which howled. But it wasn't a normal wolf howl. It was a call, deliberate and structured. Within minutes, 5 more massive wolves emerged from the forest around me. They'd surrounded my position without making a sound. I was trapped. One from the den stepped closer. It moved with the confidence of something that had never been prey, never been afraid. When it was about 20 feet away, it sat down and just watched me. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The wolf staring at me too terrified to move, the other pack members maintaining their positions around the rocks. Then the leader made a sound I'd never heard from any animal, a low rumble that sounded almost like words, like it was trying to communicate. I don't know what made me do it, but I slowly set my rifle down on the ground, not dropping it, just placing it carefully beside me. The wolf's head tilted slightly, like it was surprised.
"I'm not hunting," I said out loud, feeling ridiculous. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." The wolf studied me for another long moment, then made that rumbling sound again. This time, I could swear I heard something that sounded like trespasser. Then they were gone. All 6 of them vanished into the forest without a sound. I was alone with my racing heart and the growing certainty that everything I thought I knew about wolves was wrong. I hiked back to my snowmobile as fast as I could, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The return trip to the cabin seemed to take forever, and I kept hearing sounds in the forest around me. Branches breaking, snow crunching, always just out of sight. When I got back to the cabin, Samuel was waiting for me. "I felt them moving," he said before I could ask how he'd gotten there. "The Amarok are hunting again." "Samuel, I need you to explain exactly what we're dealing with here." My uncle looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Long ago, when the Russians first came to our lands, they brought diseases and took our hunting grounds. Many warriors died defending the territory that had been ours for thousands of years. The shamans performed a ritual to bind their spirits to the land itself, so they could continue protecting it even after death." "You're talking about ghost wolves?" "I'm talking about warriors who chose to become wolves rather than let their territory be stolen. They'd been sleeping for many decades, but something woke them up." That night, Samuel performed a protection ritual around the cabin, burning herbs and chanting in Tlingit while I watched from inside. I was still trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation for everything I'd seen. Confiscated, around midnight, they came. I saw them first through the kitchen window, 6 massive shapes moving across the clearing in perfect formation. They approached the cabin like soldiers taking a position, each wolf choosing a spot that gave them a clear view of doors and windows. The leader positioned itself directly in front of the main door. When it looked through the window, its red eyes met mine, and I heard its voice in my head, clear as if it had spoken out loud. "The old man cannot protect you forever." Samuel appeared beside me, his face grim. "They want you to stop investigating. If you continue, they'll consider you an enemy." "What happens if they consider me an enemy?"
Before Samuel could answer, the wolves began to howl. But this wasn't the wild, chaotic sound of normal wolves. This was organized almost like a song, a war song, rising and falling in complex harmonies that seemed to make the cabin itself vibrate. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The wolves were gone, but carved into the snow in front of the door was a message, deep gouges that formed symbols I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Final.
Warning, Samuel translated. Unresolved. Should have heeded the warning. Any sane person would have packed up and left the territory to the spirits. But something in me, maybe the wolf blood my grandfather always claimed we had, wouldn't let me back down. Benjamin, next day, I made a decision that nearly cost me everything. Went back to Devil's Creek, but this time I brought Samuel with me. If these were really spirit warriors, maybe a traditional elder could communicate with them properly. Maybe we could find a way to end this without more killing. We approached the den site carefully, Samuel carrying a bundle of sage and other ceremonial herbs. He'd explained that we needed to show proper respect, follow the old protocols for entering spirit territory. If they're really Amarok, Samuel said as we hiked through the snow, then they're bound by the same laws our warriors followed in life. Honor, respect for elders, protection of the innocent. They'll listen to the old words. We set up camp about a quarter-mile from the den, close enough to show we weren't afraid, but far enough to avoid seeming aggressive. Samuel built a small fire and began preparing for a formal meeting with the spirits. As the sun went down, they came. All 6 of them emerged from the forest simultaneously, moving with that same military precision I'd seen before. But this time, they didn't surround us. Instead, they formed a line facing our fire, like they were presenting themselves for formal inspection. Samuel stood and began speaking in Tlingit. His voice carried the authority of age and tradition, reciting what sounded like ancient formulas. The wolves listened without moving, their red eyes reflecting the firelight. The leader stepped forward. Up close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just an oversized wolf. Its proportions were all wrong, like something that had been forced to take a shape it wasn't meant for. Its face was too long, its eyes too knowing, its movements too deliberate. Samuel continued his recitation, and gradually I began to understand what was happening. He was performing a formal greeting between nations, acknowledging the Amarok's claim to the territory and asking permission to speak. Safeguard. When he finished, the pack leader changed. It didn't shift into human form like something from a movie. Instead, it became more than what it was. Larger, more present, radiating power that made the air itself feel heavy. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. The wind, the fire, the snow beneath our feet. Deflate. Samuel Raven, we remember your grandfather. He honored the treaties. These territories have been violated, Samuel replied, surprisingly calm. My nephew seeks to understand why the warriors have awakened. The hunting party carried weapons into forbidden ground during the dark months. They killed a sacred caribou and left its body to rot. They showed no respect for the spirits of this place. I realized they were talking about Bill Crawford's group. They'd been hunting in an area that was apparently off-limits according to agreements I'd never heard of. The trespassers have been punished, the spirit continued. But your nephew continues to investigate. He brings danger to himself and others. Samuel turned to me. Thomas, they're offering you a choice. Stop investigating and leave the territory, and they'll consider the matter closed. Continue, and they'll treat you as an enemy of their people. I looked at them, its ancient anger. But I also thought about Jake Rasmussen, traumatized and barely alive, about the other hunters who might come through here without knowing the danger. I can't just walk away, I said. People need to know about the boundaries. They need to understand what areas are forbidden. The spirit's eyes flared brighter. Then you choose to be our enemy. No, I said quickly. I choose to be a bridge. Let me help people understand the old rules. Let me make sure they respect the treaties. Samuel translated, adding his own words. The conversation continued in Tlingit for several minutes,
with the other spirits occasionally adding their voices to the discussion. Finally, the leader spoke again in English. "You would become a guardian of the treaties? A protector of the forbidden territories?" "Yes, if you'll teach me what I need to know." What happened next changed my life forever. The spirit wolf approached until it was close enough to touch. When it looked into my eyes, I saw everything: centuries of warfare, the deaths of the original warriors, their transformation into spirit guardians, decades of protecting territory that most people had forgotten was sacred. "Then you will carry our mark," it said, "and all our enemies will know you serve the treaty." It touched my forehead with one massive paw. Pain shot through my skull like lightning, and for a moment I saw the world through wolf eyes, every scent distinct, every sound meaningful, every movement in the forest part of a vast, interconnected web of life. When the vision faded, the spirits were gone. Samuel was looking at me with something between pride and concern. To me. "Look," he said, holding up his phone's camera like a mirror. In the center of my forehead was a mark that looked like it had been burned into my skin, a stylized wolf's head surrounded by traditional Tlingit designs. It was clearly visible, but somehow didn't hurt. "You're marked now, Thomas. People will know you speak for the spirits. But it also means you're responsible for keeping the peace between worlds." The official report stated that the hunting party was killed by an aggressive grizzly bear during an unusual late-season encounter. The area was immediately closed to all hunting and recreational activities. Jake Rasmussen recovered from his injuries
and moved to the lower 48. But he never spoke publicly about what happened that night. For me, everything changed. The mark on my forehead faded after a few weeks, but I could still feel it. More importantly, I could sense things I'd never noticed before: animal movements in the forest, changes in the spiritual weather of a place, and especially the presence of the Amarok pack when they were near. I became the official liaison between the Park Service and the local tribal councils. My job expanded to include enforcing traditional hunting protocols and educating visitors about the cultural significance of certain areas. Most people thought it was just political correctness, but I knew the truth. The spirits were still there, watching. Over the following months, I documented 17 different areas throughout northern Alaska where similar spirit activity had been reported. Always wolves, always connected to ancestral territories, always triggered by some violation of traditional hunting agreements. I developed new protocols for the Park Service, official procedures for respecting indigenous territorial claims and involving tribal elders in managing sensitive areas. It saved lives, though most people never knew why certain valleys were suddenly off-limits during winter months. Samuel became my mentor, teaching me the old stories and helping me understand my role as a bridge between worlds. He said the Amarok had been waiting for someone like me, someone with a foot in both the modern and traditional worlds. "They chose you because you have the wolf blood," he explained one evening as we sat by his fire, "but also because you have the heart to serve something bigger than yourself." I still patrol the Copper River region, but now I carry additional responsibilities. When hunting parties apply for permits, I check their intended routes against the traditional boundary maps Samuel provided. When someone reports unusual wolf activity, I investigate personally. Most of the time, it's just normal wolves doing normal wolf things. But sometimes, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, I find evidence of the Amarok. Tracks too large for any natural animal, bone arrangements that couldn't be random, the smell of something ancient and powerful in the wind. When that happens, I perform the protocols Samuel taught me. I leave traditional offerings, speak the old words of respect, and make sure any humans in the area understand they need to leave immediately. So far the peace has held, but I know it's fragile. Every year more people come to Alaska looking for adventure, for untouched wilderness, for the chance to hunt in areas their grandfathers could never reach. Most of them have never heard of the Amarok, never learned the old boundaries, never understood that some territories belong to spirits who remember every slight against their people.
Because why I'm telling this story? Not because I want people to believe. In spirit wolves, belief isn't required. But because respect is. If you ever find yourself hunting in the remote valleys of northern Alaska, especially during the dark months, pay attention to the signs. When the forest goes silent, when normal wolves flee an area, when you find tracks too large to be natural, that's your warning. Leave offerings of tobacco or sage. Speak words of respect for the land and its guardians. And most importantly, if you see red eyes watching you from the darkness, don't try to fight. Just leave. The Amarok are patient, but they are not forgiving. They've been protecting their territory for over a century, and they remember every promise broken, every boundary crossed, every disrespectful act committed on their sacred ground. I'm still out there, still patrolling the boundaries between worlds, and I'm still learning from Samuel, though he's getting older, and the responsibilities he's carried for decades are slowly becoming mine. Sometimes, on quiet winter nights, when the aurora dances green across the sky, I hear them howling in the distance. Not hunting calls or territorial markers, but something that sounds almost like approval, like they're satisfied with the bargain we struck. The treaties hold, the boundaries are respected, and the spirits of ancient warriors continue their eternal watch over the land they died protecting. As long as people remember to show proper respect, the peace will last. But the moment someone decides the old rules don't apply to them, the Amarok will be waiting. They always are. My name is Rebecca Starweaver, and I've spent 15 years watching the sky. Not in some dreamy way. I'm a scientist. I study the aurora borealis, those dancing lights that paint the Arctic night in green and gold. I have a PhD in astrophysics. I run the most advanced magnetometer equipment in Alaska, and I thought I knew everything about the lights above us. I was wrong. And I'm stationed at the Prudhoe Bay Research Facility, 200 miles from the nearest settlement. We're deep in polar night, 30 straight days without sun. Most people would go crazy out here, but I love it. When the aurora comes alive, it's like watching the universe breathe. The team I'm supposed to check on, 8 scientists studying the most intense aurora activity we've recorded in 20 years, they stopped answering their radio 3 days ago. I gear up for the snowmobile ride to their station. The temperature is 40 below, and the wind cuts through everything. But as I step outside, I stop dead in my tracks. The aurora is dancing directly overhead, but something's wrong. The lights are too low, hanging barely above the tree line like green fog. In 15 years, I've never seen them this close to the ground. Aurora forms in the upper atmosphere, 60 miles up. These lights are maybe 60 feet above me. I shake my head and start the snowmobile. Equipment readings can be wrong. Solar storm activity has been crazy lately. There's got to be a normal explanation. The ride takes 2 hours across flat tundra. Nothing but snow and darkness and that weird, low aurora following me the whole way. My radio crackles with static that sounds almost like voices. I turn it off. When I reach the research station, everything looks normal. Solar panels, communication tower, the main building with warm yellow light in the windows. I park and walk to the door, calling out. No answer. The handle, unlocked. Inside, coffee still steams in mugs. Computers hum quietly, screens showing normal data streams. 8 coats hang on hooks by the door. 8 pairs of boots lined up neatly underneath. But no people. I walk through each room calling names. Dr. Morrison? Tim? Anyone? My voice echoes back empty. In the main lab, I find something that makes my stomach clench. All their personal items, wallets, watches, wedding rings, are arranged in a perfect spiral pattern on the central table. The same spiral pattern I've seen 1,000 times in aurora photographs. I grab the radio and try calling base. Nothing but static that definitely sounds like whispers now. I check their equipment logs. Everything normal until 3 days ago at 11:47 p.m. Then all readings drop to 0. every single instrument, at the exact same moment. That's impossible. These are hardened systems designed to survive electromagnetic pulses. Nothing should be able to drain them all at once. When I hear something outside,
A humming sound, low and musical. I look out the window and my blood turns to ice. It has descended completely. Sheets of green light flow across the ground like water, pooling around the building. And in the light, I can see shapes. Human-sized shadows moving inside the glow, walking in slow circles around the station. I count 8 shadows. I back away from the window, heart hammering. Aurora doesn't work like this. It's charged particles hitting gas molecules in the upper atmosphere. It can't come down to ground level. It can't make shadows. It definitely can't move like it's alive. But I'm watching it happen. The humming gets louder, and I feel it in my bones now. The lights outside pulse brighter, and every piece of electronic equipment in the station flickers. My flashlight dies. The computers restart themselves. I need to think like a scientist. There has to be an explanation. Maybe it's some kind of plasma phenomenon caused by the magnetic field fluctuations. Maybe the research team evacuated and I missed the radio call. Maybe those shadows are just... The front door opens. Not violently, just a quiet click, like someone used a key. I freeze in the lab listening. Footsteps cross the main room. Slow, careful, wet-sounding steps that leave no prints on the dry floor. "Hello?" I whisper. The footsteps stop. I grab a hammer from the toolkit and creep toward the main room. Empty. But the coffee mugs on the table are full again, steaming fresh. And there's something else, a smell like ozone and burnt metal, the same smell you get right before lightning strikes. Behind me, someone clears their throat. I spin around. Dr. Helen Morrison stands in the doorway. She looks exactly like she should. Grey hair, thick glasses, the blue sweater she always wears. Except she's glowing. Soft green light comes from her skin, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Rebecca," she says, and her voice sounds wrong. Too many echoes, like she's speaking from inside a cave. "Why don't you join us?" I run. Buff and I burst out the back door into the Arctic night, and the aurora lights swirl around me like living things. The cold hits my lungs, but I keep running. Behind me, I hear Dr. Morrison laughing, and the sound multiplies into 8 voices, then dozens. My snowmobile won't start. The engine is completely dead. I look back at the station and see all 8 team members standing in the doorway now, all glowing with that sick green light. They're not quite solid. I can see the building through their bodies. I start running across the tundra, but the aurora follows. It flows over the snow like fog, and I can feel it reaching for me. Where it touches my boots, the leather starts to crack and age. Where it brushes my coat, the fabric goes brittle. The lights are trying to drain me. I make it about a mile before I trip and fall into a snowbank. When I look up, one of them is standing over me. Tim Foster, the graduate.
Student. But he's wrong in every way that matters. His face is too thin, like all the moisture has been sucked out. His eyes are black holes. When he reaches for me, I see his hand is translucent. "It doesn't hurt," he says in that cave echo voice. "We just need what you have. The energy, the life. You won't need it much longer." Reinforced, I swing the hammer at his head. It passes right through him, but there's resistance like hitting thick water. He staggers back, his glow flickering. "Iron," I gasp. "The hammerhead is iron. I remember stories my grandmother told, old stories about things that don't like iron." Propulsion. Tim hisses and dissolves back into green light that flows away across the snow. But more shapes are coming, all 8 of them, moving in that spiral pattern, closing in. I stumble back toward the station. It's the only shelter for miles, even if they came from there. I need to figure out what happened to the real research team. I need to understand what these things are. Inside, I barricade the door and start going through files. Dr. Morrison's computer is still logged in. Her last entry makes my hands shake. Day 12. Aurora activity unlike anything in recorded history. Electromagnetic readings suggest the lights are not following standard atmospheric physics. Dr. Tutu from the university arrived today with traditional knowledge about aurora spirits. Thought she was talking nonsense. Beginning to reconsider. Dr. Mary Tutu. I know her. She's Inupiat, one of the few people who combines traditional astronomy with modern science. If she was here, she might have answers. I scroll through more entries. Day 13. Confirmed aurora manifestation at ground level. Team experiencing shared dreams about floating among stars. Equipment showing impossible energy readings. Day 14. Dr. Tutu performed traditional protection ritual. Aurora responded aggressively. Something is very wrong. The final one line. They're beautiful. They just want to dance with us among the lights. Outside, the humming grows louder. Confiscated, I find Dr. Tutu's research notes scattered across her workstation. Her handwriting is shaky, urgent. Not aurora. Ancient things from between stars feed on life force. Inupiat elders warned about lights that hunt during the long dark. There's a sketch that makes my throat close up. Human figures surrounded by flowing light. But the figures are getting smaller, older, more withered with each drawing. At the bottom she wrote, "They consume time itself. Your years, your energy, everything you are." A sound from the basement freezes my blood. Crying. Weak, human crying. I grab my flashlight, somehow it's working again, and creep down the stairs. The basement is used for equipment storage, but someone's down there. Someone alive. I find her in the corner behind the generator. Dr. Mary Tutu, but she's been changed. Her black hair is completely white. Deep wrinkles line her face.
She looks 40 years older than when I saw her last month. "Rebecca?" Her voice is barely a whisper. "You have to get out. They're not finished feeding." Arched, I kneel beside her. "What happened to the team?" "Drained," she says. "They came down from the sky 3 nights ago. Not aurora, never aurora. Old things, hungry things. They wear the team's shapes now, but the real people, gone." She grabs my arm with fingers that feel like paper. The traditional stories, they're all true. During the long dark, when the lights dance closest to Earth, they hunt. The elders built protections, kept people safe. But we forgot. We stopped believing. How do we fight them? You can't fight them. You can only survive until they return to the sky. She coughs, and I taste metal in the air. Iron disrupts their forms temporarily, sacred symbols from my grandmother's time. But they're too strong now, too fed. The lights outside pulse brighter. Through the basement windows, I see the green glow seeping under the doors upstairs. "They know you're here," Dr. Tutu whispers. "Fresh energy, young life. They've been waiting." Defending shakes. Not from wind, from something massive landing on the roof. Footsteps cross overhead, but they sound wrong. Too light, like empty shells walking around. Dr. Tutu presses something into my hand. A small metal amulet, dark with age. My grandmother's. Iron and sacred copper, blessed by 5 generations of star watchers. It won't save you, but it might give you a chance. The footsteps stop directly above us. Then the ceiling rips open. Green light pours down like water, but thick, almost solid. And in the light, something descends. Not one of the fake team members, something vast and alien, made of flowing aurora that hurts to look at directly. It has a shape, sort of, tall as a person, but stretching upward into infinity. Arms like streamers of light ending in what might be hands, if hands were made of pure energy. Where its face should be, a swirling void that pulls at my vision, trying to draw me in. It speaks without words directly into my mind. "Fresh life, young energy. You will dance with us among the endless lights." Dr. Tutu screams. The thing reaches for her with one impossible arm, and where the light touches her, she ages even faster. Her hair falls out. Her skin turns papery. In seconds, she's ancient, then dust, then nothing. I run up the stairs as the thing fills the basement behind me. The whole station is glowing now, green light seeping from every surface. The fake team members wait in the main room, but they're changing, becoming more obviously wrong. Their glow is brighter, their forms less human. "Rebecca," says the thing wearing Dr. Morrison's shape, "you've seen our true form. Beautiful, isn't it? We're offering you immortality, life among the stars. All we need is what you are now, your warmth, your time, your precious little human energy." I back toward the door, clutching Dr. Tutu's amulet. "Why? Why do you need us?" "Because we are old beyond your understanding," the Morrison thing says. "We have traveled between worlds for millions of years, and traveling takes so much energy. Life energy, youth energy, fear and hope and love. Such powerful fuel." The Tim thing steps closer. "Your planet has such rich life, such warm, bright souls. We've been feeding here for thousands of years, but carefully. A few hunters, some lost travelers. Your people made stories about us, built protections. But you've grown so many and forgotten so much." "This time," says another voice, Dr. Chen, the physicist, but speaking with that cave echo, "we take more, much more. The long dark is perfect for feeding, and your modern minds don't believe in protection anymore." From the basement flows up through the floor, filling the room with light that burns my eyes. It reaches for me, and I feel time itself bending around those impossible fingers. I hold up the amulet, and the thing recoils. The light dims slightly. "Click!" "Clever," it thinks at me. "The old woman taught you well. But iron cannot save you, only delay. And delay makes the feast sweeter." Battlefield. I have maybe minutes before that amulet fails. I need a real plan. Pledged. Then I remember something from Dr. Morrison's equipment logs. The electromagnetic pulse generator in the lab. It's designed to simulate solar storm conditions for testing equipment. If these things are made of electromagnetic energy, cut off. I run. The fake team members don't follow me into the lab. That should be my first clue something's wrong, but I'm too focused on the EMP generator to think clearly. Clicking. It's a massive device, designed to create controlled electromagnetic pulses for equipment testing. In theory, if these entities are electromagnetic in nature, a strong enough pulse might disrupt their cohesion. I start the charging sequence. The machine whines as it builds power, but it takes time, 5 minutes to full charge. Outside the lab, I hear the team members talking among themselves in voices like distant thunder. "She thinks she can hurt us," the Morrison thing laughs. "Clever little scientist. Should we tell her?" "Let her try," says another voice. "Fear makes the energy sweeter." Playoffs. The amulet in my hand grows warm, then hot. Through the lab windows, I see that vast entity outside, flowing around the building like a luminous river. It's not trying to get in, it's waiting. 4 minutes. Sluggish. I check the equipment settings, push the power to maximum. This pulse should be strong enough to knock out every electronic device within half a mile. If it doesn't work. Dr. Morrison's voice, but kind now, grandmotherly. "You're only making this harder on yourself. Come out, dear. Let us show you the wonders we've seen." Pledged. Throdenukio. 3 minutes. Through the door, I see her silhouette. Still glowing, but dimmer now. More human-looking. We've danced between galaxies, swum in the light of dying stars. We can share that with you. All you have to do is stop fighting. "What happened to the real team?" I call out. "They're with us," she says. "Part of us now. Their knowledge, their memories, their personalities, we preserve everything important. Death is such a human concept, Rebecca. We offer something much better." 2 minutes. The building shakes. More entities are landing on the roof. I can hear them moving around up there, like giant birds made of electricity. How many of them are there? "Your world is changing," Dr. Morrison continues. "More people, bigger cities, brighter lights. The old dark places are disappearing.
Soon, we'll have to feed openly in your populated areas. But you could help us, guide us to the best sources. Scientists have such rich, complex energy. Searches, what she's really saying. This isn't just about 8 researchers in Alaska. They're planning something bigger, a feeding frenzy during the next solar maximum, when aurora activity peaks worldwide. Cities full of people, all visible from space, to hunting entities made of light. Seconds. The amulet burns my palm now, and I can see cracks forming in its surface. Dr. Tutu's protection is failing. "Time's up, dear," the Morrison thing says, and the lab door dissolves into green light. She steps through, but she's changing again, growing taller, more angular, her face becoming geometrical patterns of light. Behind her, the other fake team members flow in like liquid aurora. "You cannot stop us with your little machine," she says. "We are energy, pure electromagnetic consciousness. Your pulse will feed us, not harm us." 15 seconds. Blackjack, my heart stops. She's right. An electromagnetic pulse won't hurt something made of electromagnetic energy. It'll supercharge it. I'm about to make them stronger. 10 seconds. But I have no choice now. The machine is fully charged, and the amulet crumbles to dust in my hand. The Morrison thing reaches for me with fingers made of flowing light. 5 seconds. I slam the activation button. The pulse erupts from the generator like a bomb of invisible force. Every light in the station dies instantly. My watch stops. The heating system cuts out. But the entities don't dissolve. They grow brighter. Laugh fills the room as she absorbs the electromagnetic energy, her form becoming more solid, more real. "Thank you, Rebecca. That was delicious." I was right about one thing, though. The pulse knocked out every electronic device in the area, including their equipment, including the systems they were using to maintain their forms on this plane of existence. For just a moment, as they gorge on the pulse energy, they become solid, physical, vulnerable. I grab the iron hammer and swing it at the Morrison thing's head. This time, it connects. She screams, a sound like tearing metal, and her form breaks apart into streams of light. The other entities recoil, suddenly uncertain. "Iron!" the Tim thing hisses. "When we are solid, iron can hurt us." But the effect is temporary. Already, they're starting to become translucent again. In seconds, they'll be untouchable energy beings once more. The equipment shed out back. If I can find more iron tools, maybe enough to... The massive entity from the basement flows out of the main building like a luminous flood. It rises above me, vast and ancient and hungry, and I feel its attention focus on me like a physical weight. "Enough games," it thinks at me. "You have provided much entertainment, but now you feed us." It reaches down with arms like aurora curtains, and where they touch the ground, the snow turns black, and the earth underneath crumbles to dust. I'm out of options, out of tricks, out of hope. Then I hear rotors. A helicopter rises over the ridge, spotlights blazing. Military by the look of it. Someone must have detected the electromagnetic pulse, sent an investigation team. The massive entity turns toward this new source of energy, and I realize with horror what's about to happen. These pilots have no idea what they're flying into. But their arrival gives me one last chance. I sprint for the communication equipment in the backup shed. Emergency power, hardened against EMP. I grab the radio and start broadcasting on all frequencies. "Mayday! Mayday! Military helicopter approaching Prudhoe Bay Research Station. Do not land. Repeat, do not land. Electromagnetic entities, extremely dangerous. Stay airborne and request immediate backup." The pilot's voice crackles back. "Research Station? This is Colonel Martinez, U.S. Army. We're responding to unusual energy readings. Please clarify electromagnetic entities." Above us, the massive aurora thing flows upward toward the helicopter like a luminous wave. "Sir, you have to get out of here now. These things feed on life energy. They've killed 8 scientists. They're not natural phenomena. They're alive and hostile." "Research station, you're breaking up. We're coming down to extract you." Through the shed window, I watch the entity engulf the helicopter. The rotors slow, then stop. The aircraft starts falling, but gently, like a feather. Inside the cockpit, I see the pilots aging rapidly, their hair turning white, their faces becoming skull-like. The helicopter lands with surprising gentleness, and the pilots climb out. But they're wrong now, just like the research team. Glowing green, moving too smoothly, their eyes black pits. "Rebecca," Colonel Martinez calls out in that cave echo voice. "2 more strong minds to sustain us. Your military has such disciplined energy, so useful for long journeys." I'm surrounded now. The original 8 entities, plus 2 pilots, and that vast thing above them all, pulsing with stolen life force. Which I notice something. They're brighter than before, more solid-looking. They've fed so much that they're having trouble maintaining their energy forms. Like they're overfull, sluggish. Which they're all here, in one place. Aurora research, how electromagnetic phenomena can interfere with each other, create cancellation patterns when waves meet at the right frequency. They're all broadcasting on similar, standing wave pattern, force them to cancel each other out. I key the radio to maximum power and start cycling through frequencies, looking for their resonance point. The entities notice what I'm doing and start moving toward the shed. But they're moving slowly, bloated with energy. There, on 147.3 megahertz, the radio starts screaming with feedback. That's their carrier frequency. Combating, I lock onto it and boost the gain to maximum. The radio overloads and starts smoking, but it's creating a standing wave pattern that makes all the entities flicker. They're cancelling each other out. Clever, the vast thing thinks at me, but its voice is weaker now. Very clever, but you only delay the inevitable. Maybe, but the sun will rise eventually, even in December in Alaska. Aurora phenomena weaken during daylight hours. I just have to survive until dawn. That's only 18 hours away. I don't remember most of that night. What I do remember, the entities circling the shed like wolves, testing the electromagnetic interference pattern for weaknesses, the radio finally dying, taking the protective frequency with it, and the desperate scramble to the backup generator. Jury-rigging a signal amplifier from spare parts, while things made of light pressed against the walls. The battery in my emergency beacon giving out just as real dawn, not aurora, but actual sunlight, crested the horizon. Watching 10 entities dissolve into wisps of green light that fled upward into the brightening sky like smoke. Finding the real research team in the main building basement. 8 dried husks that used to be brilliant scientists. The official report called it rapid dehydration due to heating system failure, which was easier to believe than the truth. Colonel Martinez and his co-pilot the same way. The helicopter's black box recorded nothing unusual, just a routine landing and immediate radio silence. I spent 3 weeks in a military hospital, being debriefed by people who didn't believe a word I said. They classified the entire incident, declared the research area off-limits during Aurora season, and reassigned me to a desk job in Anchorage. But I didn't take the desk job. Instead, I started the Aurora Early Warning Network, a volunteer organization of scientists, pilots, and emergency responders across the Arctic regions. Officially, we monitor space weather and electromagnetic phenomena. Unofficially, we watch
for signs of the feeders. Semantics. Because they came back. Different locations each time, always during the long dark, always in remote areas with small research teams or isolated communities. Northern Canada, 1994. Siberia, 1995. Norway, 1997. Each time the official reports blamed equipment failures, sudden storms, or tragic accidents. I knew better.
The feeding events are getting bigger, more frequent. Solar maximum is coming in 2001, and the aurora displays will be visible much further south than usual. Cities that have never seen the northern lights will suddenly have green curtains dancing overhead. I wonder how many people will step outside to watch the beautiful lights. How many will notice that this time the aurora seems closer, more solid, almost like it's reaching down toward them. I've tried warning the authorities, shared my research with NASA, NOAA, the military. They listen politely and file my reports under atmospheric anomalies. Some believe me privately, but can't risk their careers on something so impossible. So I continue the work alone. The Aurora Early Warning Network has 43 volunteers now, scattered across the Northern Hemisphere. We share information, monitor electromagnetic readings, and try to evacuate small communities when the signs appear. We've saved maybe 100 people over the years. We've lost twice that many. Dr. Mary Tutu's death wasn't in vain. Her grandmother's stories led me to other indigenous communities with similar legends. The Sami people call them light thieves. Inuit elders have dozens of names for different types of hunting aurora. Aboriginal Australians know about the star drinkers that sometimes appear in their southern lights. All the traditional protections involve iron, sacred symbols, and staying indoors during peak aurora activity. The old people knew. We forgot. My electromagnetic sensors picked up unusual readings over Fairbanks. Aurora activity dropping down to less than 1,000 feet altitude. Radio interference matching the pattern I remember from Prudhoe Bay. Fairbanks has 30,000 people. I've sent warnings to emergency services, posted alerts on every amateur radio frequency, called in favors with meteorologists who've learned to trust my hunches about dangerous aurora activity. Some people will listen, most won't. If you're anywhere in Alaska, stay inside. Keep your electronics off. Don't look at the lights, no matter how beautiful they seem. And if you see aurora touching the ground, if you hear that humming sound like distant music, if the lights start to form shapes that look almost human, run. The beautiful lights in the sky aren't always friendly. Some stars are predators, are getting hungrier. My name is Isaiah Thunderfoot, and I've been a ranger for 16 years. Most people think that's a long time to spend walking around in the woods, but when you're part Cherokee and part Choctaw like me, the mountains feel like home. They feel safe. At least, they used to. Work in the Washita National Forest, specifically the quartz formations are beautiful white and clear crystals that jut out of the rock faces like frozen lightning. I have a PhD in geology, which makes me the go-to guy when they need someone to check on mineral sites or investigate weird rock formations. The old folks in my family always told stories about the mountains, about serpents with horns that lived deep underground, sleeping beneath the crystal formations. My grandmother used to say the crystals were actually the serpent's scales, pushed up through the earth when it moved in its sleep. I never believed any of that. I'm a scientist. I know that quartz forms when silicon and oxygen cool down under pressure. I know that crystal veins follow geological fault lines. I've mapped crystal formations in 7 different mountain ranges, and I've published papers about how they grow. The serpent stories? Just old legends created by people who didn't understand geology. That was before Serpent's Crown Mountain. Serpent's Crown sits about 18 miles from my ranger station. It's a 2,800-foot peak covered in some of the most beautiful crystal formations you'll ever see. The Cherokee and Choctaw consider it sacred, which is why it's protected land. No mining, no development, just pure wilderness. April of 1989, I got a call that changed everything. "Isaiah, we've got some hikers reporting weird stuff up on Serpent's Crown," my supervisor Tom said over the radio. "They claim the mountain is moving." Laughed. Moving how? Like landslides? Like breathing. Like it's alive. I loaded up my geological survey equipment, seismometer, compass, crystal analysis kit, the works. If the mountain was shifting, there had to be a scientific reason. Maybe some underground water movement or small earthquakes. Arkansas gets those sometimes. The hike up to Serpent's Crown takes about 4 hours. It's steep, rocky terrain with lots of loose shale. As I climbed higher, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. First, it was too quiet. In 16 years of ranger work, I'd never heard silence like this. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed muted. The rocks themselves felt like they were holding their breath. Second, my compass was acting strange. Instead of pointing north, the needle kept swinging toward the mountain peak. I tapped it, thinking maybe I'd damaged it on the climb, but it kept doing the same thing. Third, the crystal formations looked different than they had on my last survey 6 months ago. They seemed to be oriented in new directions, and some veins I'd never mapped
before were clearly visible in the rock faces.
I made camp about halfway up the mountain as the sun started to set. That's when I heard it for the first time, a deep, rumbling sound coming from inside the mountain. Not like an earthquake or rockfall, more rhythmic, more organic. Like a heartbeat. Told myself it was just underground water movement. Spring runoff can create strange sounds in cave systems. But as I lay in my sleeping bag that night, the rumbling continued in a steady pattern. Thump, 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 thump. And sometimes, I swear the ground beneath me rose and fell just slightly, like the mountain was breathing. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning brought a clear sky, but something felt even more wrong. The crystal formations that had been glowing softly in yesterday's sunlight now seemed dull and lifeless. Worse, several large quartz veins showed signs of fresh growth, something that should take decades, not hours. I set up my seismometer near the largest crystal outcropping and started taking readings. What I found made no sense. The machine was detecting rhythmic seismic activity with a pattern I'd never seen before. Every 45 seconds, a gentle vibration pulsed through the rock. It wasn't random like an earthquake. It was regular, steady, like breathing. I called my colleague, Dr. Rachel Moonbeam, a seismologist from the University of Arkansas. We'd worked together on several geological surveys, and I trusted her judgment. "Rachel, I'm sending you some readings from Serpent's Crown. Tell me what you think." Unfinished, she called back an hour later. "Isaiah, these readings are impossible. It looks like the mountain has a heartbeat." "That's what I was afraid you'd say." "I'm driving out there. Don't do anything stupid until I arrive." Barbara, I decided to climb higher and check the crystal formations near the peak. That's when things got really strange. As I approached a cluster of white quartz crystals, about 10 feet tall, they started to glow. Not reflecting sunlight, actually glowing from within, like they had their own light source. The glow pulsed in the same rhythm as the seismic readings. I reached out to touch one of the crystals, and the moment my fingers made contact, an electrical shock ran through my whole body. Not painful, but definitely there, like touching a low-voltage battery. That's when I heard the voice. Not without, with I deliver them. It was movement. Not without a bit of it, waltzing my deer with one of the crystal. That's when I heard the voice. It was a common back to the people. The voice in terms as many of the greatment was current, crystals, which was invested. What I did had a diaper down. What is was the time I had it done, I reached out. But it is not sure that was a future for the light source. It is not sure that we know them, but without making the roam so. Deep, ancient, speaking in a language I somehow understood, even though I'd never heard it before. Who disturbs the sacred scales? I jerked my hand back and stumbled backward. The crystal's glow faded, and the voice disappeared. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. Just geology, I whispered to myself. Piezoelectric effect. Quartz can generate electrical charges under pressure. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I called Rachel. Again. "How much longer until you get here?" 2 hours. Why? What's wrong? You actually drink them. Water crystals are responding to touch, electrical activity. That's normal for quartz under the right conditions. Rachel, they're glowing, and I heard something, like a voice. Long pause. Isaiah, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should come down off the mountain. Minimized. Before I could answer, the ground beneath my feet shifted. Not like an earthquake, more like the mountain was adjusting its position. I grabbed onto a nearby tree as loose rocks tumbled down the slope. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. The entire peak of Serpent's Crown Mountain, all 2,800 feet of it, moved up and down in one smooth motion, like the mountain was taking a deep breath. I watched it happen 3 more times before my legs gave out and I sat down hard on a boulder. This wasn't geology, this wasn't science, this was something else entirely. Some married. Rachel arrived just as the sun was setting. She took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "Show me the seismic readings," she said, all business. I handed her the printouts. She studied them for several minutes, frowning deeper with each page. "These patterns, Isaiah, this looks like biological activity, like the readings we'd get from monitoring a sleeping whale. A whale that's 2,800 feet tall and made of rock." She looked up at the mountain peak, then back at the readings. "There has to be an explanation." "I heard a voice, Rachel, coming from the crystals. Electromagnetic interference can create auditory hallucinations." "Then explain this." I led her to the crystal formation where I'd had the encounter. The moment we got within 20 feet, the crystals started glowing again, bright enough to read by, pulsing in that same steady rhythm. Rachel pulled out her own equipment and started taking readings. "Electrical activity is off the charts," she muttered. "But the power source? There's no way these crystals should be generating this much energy." She reached toward one of the glowing crystals, and I grabbed her wrist. "Don't touch them." "Isaiah, I'm a scientist. I need to—" The crystal flared brighter, and suddenly the air around us smelled like ozone, like right before a lightning strike. The hair on my arms stood up. "Rachel, get back!" But she was already reaching for the crystal. The moment her fingers made contact, a bolt of lightning shot down from the clear sky and struck her. Synchronized, she collapsed, her whole body convulsing. I dragged her away from the crystals as fast as I could, but the damage was done. When the convulsions finally stopped, she couldn't move her left arm, and her speech was slurred. "The mountain," she whispered. "It's protecting itself." That night, as I helped Rachel down the mountain to get medical attention, I heard the voice again. Clearer this time, more insistent. "Leave the sacred scales untouched, or face the serpent's wrath." I looked back at Serpent's Crown Mountain one more time before we reached the bottom. In the moonlight, I could see the entire peak rising and falling slowly. The mountain was definitely breathing, and it was definitely alive. The hospital, where doctors confirmed what I already knew, she'd suffered serious nerve damage from the lightning strike. The strange part was that lightning doesn't usually hit on clear days. The weather service had recorded no electrical storm activity in our area. But I knew better now. The mountain had struck her down for trying to touch its crystals. Against all common sense, I went back 3 days later. This time I brought a full geological survey team, 5 other rangers and 2 scientists from the state university. If something was really happening on Serpent's Crown, we needed to document it properly. The team thought I was crazy until we got to the base of the mountain. "Why is it so quiet?" asked Jenny Chen, one of the rangers. "Where are all the animals?" That's when we found the first body. Black bear, lying at the base of a large crystal formation. No wounds, no signs of struggle. It looked like it had just laid down and died. When we examined it closer, we found something impossible. The bear's body was slowly turning into crystal. Its fur had become thin quartz strands. Its claws were pure white crystal. Parts of its skeleton were already completely transformed into some kind of mineral I'd never seen before. "How long has it been dead?" asked Dr. Martinez, the other scientist. "Based on decomposition, maybe 3 days," I said. "But the crystallization, that should take thousands of years." We found series more animals in the same condition, all at the base of different crystal formations, all partially turned to stone. A family of raccoons, 2 deer, a mountain lion. All of them looked peaceful, like they'd simply chosen to lie down and become part of the mountain. "We need to get samples," Dr. Martinez said, pulling out his collection kit. "Don't touch anything," I warned him. "Remember what happened to Rachel." But he was already approaching one of the crystal formations with a small hammer and chisel. The moment he raised the hammer, every crystal on the mountainside began to glow. The glow was angry this time, pulsing fast, like a rapid heartbeat. "Martinez, stop!" He brought the chisel down on a small piece of quartz. The sound that came from the mountain wasn't geological, it was organic. A deep, rumbling roar that came from everywhere at once. From the rocks, from the trees, from the ground beneath our feet. The crystals exploded, not like bombs, more like they were shooting themselves out of the rock faces. Sharp pieces of quartz flew through the air like arrows. We all dove for cover as crystal shards embedded themselves in tree trunks around us. Martinez wasn't fast enough. A piece of crystal the size of a baseball caught him in the chest, punching through his shirt and into his ribs. He went down hard, bleeding from multiple cuts. "We need to get him out of here," Jenny shouted over the sound of more crystals firing from the mountain walls. But as we tried to lift Martinez, the ground beneath us started to move. Not shaking, actually reshaping itself. The dirt and rocks were flowing like water, creating walls around us. In seconds, we were trapped in a circular pit about 10 feet deep. The crystal formations above us grew taller, leaning inward over our heads like a cage. That's when I heard the voice again, but this time everyone could hear it. It spoke in English now, words that echoed from the stone walls around us. Those who wound the sacred scales must join them, become one with the serpent. Weakest Martinez's bleeding had stopped, but not because his wounds were healing. His blood was turning into liquid crystal, flowing in geometric patterns across his skin. Where it touched, his flesh began to harden and transform. "Help me," he whispered, but his voice was already changing, becoming hollow and musical, like wind through stone. Jenny was crying. "What's happening to him?" I looked up at the crystal formations towering over us and finally understood what we were dealing with. This wasn't just a mountain with strange mineral properties. This was a living creature, something ancient and massive that had been sleeping beneath the Arkansas hills for centuries. The crystals weren't formations, they were scales. We were trapped inside a horned serpent. "Me," I called out to whatever was listening. "We didn't mean any harm. We were just trying to understand." The voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Understanding comes through joining. Become crystal. Become eternal. Become part of the serpent's crown." The walls of our pit began to close in. I could see crystal formations growing from the stone, reaching toward us with sharp, grasping fingers. His eyes was almost completely transformed now. Quartz. When he opened his mouth to scream, musical notes came out instead of sound. I pulled out my radio and tried to call for help, but all I got was static mixed with that same musical tone. The serpent was jamming our communications. "There has to be a way out," Jenny said, but her voice was getting thin with panic. Confiscated, I thought about everything my grandmother had told me about the horned serpents, about how they protected sacred places, about how they could be appeased with proper respect and offerings. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pouch of tobacco, something I always carried to honor my ancestors when I visited sacred sites. "Grandmother Serpent," I called out in Cherokee, the words coming back to me from childhood ceremonies I'd almost forgotten. "We ask for mercy. We offer tobacco and respect." I sprinkled the tobacco on the ground and began singing an old song my grandmother had taught me, a song for asking forgiveness from the spirits of the earth. The crystal walls stopped growing. The musical sound faded away, and slowly, very slowly, the walls of our prison began to sink back into the ground. But Martinez was gone. Where his body had been, there was now a perfect crystal sculpture of a man, his face frozen in a scream of terror and wonder. Disappeared, I helped the surviving team members gather their equipment. We had to get off the mountain before the serpent changed its mind. But as we started down the trail, I heard the voice one last time. The sacred scales are protected, Isaiah Thunderfoot. Remember this mercy. Others may not be so fortunate. I looked back at the mountain peak and saw something that will haunt my dreams forever. The entire mountain was moving, shifting its position like a giant snake getting comfortable. And at the very top, two massive crystal formations were rotating to track our movement. Eyes. The serpent was watching us leave. I spent the next 2 weeks researching everything I could find about horned serpents in Cherokee and Choctaw mythology. What I learned made my blood run cold. The legends weren't just stories, they were warnings. Horned serpents were ancient earth spirits that could take the form of mountains, rivers, or other geographical features. They were incredibly powerful, but usually dormant, sleeping for decades or centuries at a time. They only awakened when their sacred places were threatened. And according to the oldest stories, Serpent's Crown Mountain was the dwelling place of the most powerful horned serpent in the entire region. The mining company found out about the crystal formations 3 days after our disastrous expedition. "You can't let them up there," I told Tom, my supervisor. "That thing will kill anyone who tries to mine those crystals." "Isaiah, I filed your report, but nobody believes it. A mountain that's alive? Crystal formations that defend themselves? Come on." "What about Martinez? What about Rachel's lightning strike?" "Accidents happen. The mining company has all the proper permits. They're going up tomorrow." I treshed could to stop them. Called the tribal council. Filed environmental protection claims. Even tried to get the site designated as archaeologically significant. Nothing worked. At dawn, I watched from the ranger station as a convoy of mining trucks headed towards Serpent's Crown Mountain. 12 workers, 2 engineers, and enough equipment to start blasting operations immediately. I knew I had to try to warn them, even though they probably wouldn't listen. The hike up the mountain felt different this time. The air was thick and electric, like right before a tornado. My compass wasn't just pointing toward the mountain anymore, it was spinning wildly, unable to find any direction at all. I got closer to the peak, I could hear machinery running. The high whine of drills, the rumble of heavy equipment. They were already working. Found them at the main crystal formation, the one where I'd first heard the serpent's voice. They'd set up drilling equipment and were preparing to blast a hole directly into the largest quartz vein. "Stop!" I shouted as I ran into their work site. "You have to get out of here." The foreman, a big man named Davidson, turned to face me. "You're that ranger, right? The one who filed all the crazy reports?" "Those crystals are protected. This is a sacred site." "These crystals are worth about $2 million, Davidson said, "and we have legal mining rights. It's a horned serpent, and if you disturb those crystals, you need to leave, Ranger. This is private property now." I looked around at the 12 workers, young men mostly, just doing their jobs. They had no idea what they were about to wake up. "Give me 5 minutes, I begged. Just 5 minutes to show you something." "5 minutes, then you're gone." I approached the largest crystal formation and placed my hand on its surface. Immediately, it began to glow with that familiar inner light. Workers stepped back, muttering to each other. "Electrical charge in the quartz," Davidson said dismissively. "Happens all the time in mineral formations." But as the crystal grew brighter, the ground beneath our feet started to vibrate. Not the quick shake of machinery, the slow, rhythmic pulse I'd felt before. "That's the mountain's heartbeat," I said.
This whole peak is a living creature. The crystal I was touching flared suddenly, and the voice spoke directly into all of our minds at once. "Who dares wound the sacred scales?" Half the workers dropped their tools and ran, but Davidson and the others just stood there, staring at the crystal formation in shock. "Amplified electromagnetic fields," Davidson said, but his voice was shaking. "Some kind of natural radio phenomenon." I grabbed his arm. "Look at the mountain peak." We all turned to look at the summit of Serpent's Crown. What we saw destroyed any hope of rational explanation. Confiscated, the entire top of the mountain was rising up out of the ground, not breaking apart, lifting as one solid piece. As it rose, we could see that it wasn't just rock and dirt. It was covered in scales, massive crystal scales that caught the sunlight like prisms. The peak kept rising until it was towering 50 feet above the rest of the mountain. Then it turned. It was a head, a gigantic serpent's head, crowned with crystal horns that must have been 100 feet long. Two eyes the size of houses opened
and fixed on our tiny work crew. "Run!" I whispered, then louder, "Run!" Legalize. Remaining workers scattered, but Davidson was frozen in place, staring up at the impossible creature towering over us. The serpent opened its mouth and roared. The sound was like 1,000 landslides happening at once. Crystal formations all over the mountainside began shooting toward us like missiles. I tackled Davidson and rolled both of us behind the drilling equipment, just as a crystal spear, the size of a telephone pole, punched through the spot where he'd been standing. "We have to get to the trees," I shouted over the sound of more crystals exploding from the mountain walls. But as we tried to run, the ground beneath us started to flow and shift. The serpent was reshaping the entire mountainside, creating walls and barriers to keep us trapped. In seconds, we found ourselves in a narrow canyon with crystal walls rising on both sides. The only way out was forward, toward the base of the serpent's massive head. "This isn't possible," Davidson kept saying. "This isn't possible." But it was happening whether he believed it or not. As we stumbled through the crystal canyon, I could see what the serpent was doing. It was herding us toward its mouth, like a snake driving prey into a corner. Open into a circular clearing directly below the creature's head. Its eyes tracked our movement, and when it opened its mouth, we could see rows of crystal teeth the size of cars. "Isaiah Thunderfoot," the serpent spoke, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You showed respect before. You offered tobacco and sang the old songs. But this one," its gaze fixed on Davidson, "this one sought to wound the sacred scales for profit." "Please," I said, stepping between Davidson and the serpent. He didn't understand. He's just a man doing his job. "Ignorance is not innocence," the serpent replied. "But you may offer a choice. His life for yours. Join the sacred scales willingly, and he may leave unharmed." I looked back at Davidson. He were family, probably. Kids who needed their father to come home. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about sacrifice and respect, about the price of disturbing ancient powers. "For I accept," I said. "No!" Davidson grabbed my arm. "I won't let you die for my mistake." But I was already walking toward the serpent's head, pulling out my pouch of tobacco again. "Grandmother Serpent," I said in Cherokee, "I offer myself to protect the sacred scales. But I ask that you remember, not all humans are your enemies. Some of us still honor the old ways." The serpent's massive head lowered until its eyes were level with mine. "You speak truth, Isaiah Thunderfoot. The earth spirits have watched you for many seasons. You have protected sacred places and honored the ancestors." Only of the crystal horns on its head began to glow, and a small piece broke off, floating down to hover in front of me. "Take this," the serpent said. "Carry the sacred scale. When others threaten the sleeping serpents, show them this token. Some will listen. Some will remember the old respect." Investigators, I reached out and took the crystal scale. It was warm to the touch, and hummed with internal energy. Pleasing. The mountain will sleep again, the serpent continued, but the sacred scales will remain protected. See that they are not disturbed. Forehead, the enormous head began to sink back down into the mountain. As it descended, the crystal walls around us started to flow back into the ground, releasing us. In minutes, Serpent's Crown looked like a normal mountain again. But I knew better now. I knew what lay sleeping beneath the crystal formations. Davidson and I made it back down the mountain in silence. The other workers had already fled, and the mining equipment was abandoned. Dismantle. Submissive. Company filed their own report about unexplained geological phenomena and officially abandoned their claims on Serpent's Crown Mountain. That was 36 years ago. Serpent's Crown Mountain is now permanently protected as a sacred site. No mining, no development, no drilling. The official paperwork calls it an environmentally sensitive area with significant seismic activity, volcanic. But I know the real reason it's protected. Rachel recovered from her lightning strike, though she still has numbness in her left arm. She never talks about what happened on the mountain, but sometimes I catch her staring at crystal formations with a look of deep respect. Martinez was never found. The official report says he fell into a crevasse, but I know better. Sometimes, when I hike near the base of Serpent's Crown, I can see a crystal formation that looks remarkably like a human figure. It's beautiful in its own way, like he became part of something eternal and powerful. I kept the crystal scale the serpent gave me. Over the years, I've had to use it 3 times when other mining companies or development groups tried to disturb sacred crystal sites in the Ouachita Mountains. Each time, I showed them the scale and told them a simplified version of the story, about ancient protections and dangerous geological instabilities. Most of them listened. A few didn't. The ones who didn't listen, well, the mountains have many ways of protecting themselves. I'm retiring next month after 47 years as a ranger. The new guy taking over my territory is a young Choctaw geologist named Michael Crowfeather. I've been training him for 6 months, teaching him which sites need special protection and which crystal formations should never be disturbed. Yesterday, I gave him the serpent's scale. "What is it?" he asked, holding the crystal up to the light. "Probation," I told him. "There are powers in these mountains that science can't explain, old powers that demand respect. If you remember that, you'll do fine." He nodded, understanding in a way that city-educated scientists never could. Last week, I hiked up to Serpent's Crown one final time, not as a ranger, but as a grandson, saying goodbye to his grandmother. I brought tobacco and sang the old songs. The mountain could sense the massive presence sleeping beneath the crystal scales. As I turned to leave, I heard the voice one last time, gentle now, almost fond. "Thank you, Isaiah Thunderfoot. The sacred scales are safe in your care." But before I got to the bottom, I heard something that made me stop and look back. A sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic, regular. The mare was breathing again. Other rangers have started 120 around Arkansas and Oklahoma, formations that glow at night, unexplained seismic readings, animals found transformed into mineral sculptures. The serpents are waking up. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the world has forgotten how to respect sacred places. Maybe it's because too many people see the earth as something to be conquered instead of honored. Or maybe it's just time. Whatever the reason, I'm glad I won't be the one dealing with it. That's a job for younger rangers now. Rangers like Michael Crowfeather, who understand that some mountains are more alive than others. Some things, sleeping in the earth, are better left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Ouachita Mountains, remember this story. Respect the crystal formations. Leave tobacco if you know how. Sing the old songs if you remember them. And if you ever see a mountain that seems to breathe, walk away. Walk away and don't look back. The serpents are watching, and they have very long memories.